The morning sun rose slowly above the hills of Enugu, casting golden light across the ancient kingdom of Umuok. The city was already alive with movement long before sunrise. Traders arranged tomatoes and peppers in colorful pyramids beside the roadside. Commercial buses honked endlessly through crowded streets while the smell of roasted corn and fried akara floated through the humid air. But the greatest excitement that morning was not inside the busy markets. It was at the royal palace. Servants rushed across the massive compound carrying baskets of flowers, polishing golden railings, and sweeping every corner until it sparkled. Royal guards stood in neat lines near the palace gate, their uniforms spotless beneath the blazing morning sun. Today, the crown prince was returning home. For 7 long years, Prince Chima Okafor had lived in the United States studying business management, international politics, and finance. During those years, stories about him spread across the kingdom constantly. Some people said he had become too westernized. Others said he returned only in private jets and spoke with an American accent now. Young women across the kingdom dreamed about him endlessly after seeing photos online of the handsome billionaire prince attending elite parties in New York and California. But the older chiefs worried. They feared the prince no longer respected tradition. Inside the palace throne room, King Obiara sat silently upon his golden throne while several elderly chiefs stood nearby. "He has stayed abroad too long," one chief muttered carefully. "He must remember who he is," another added. King Obiara remained quiet for several seconds before finally speaking. "My son knows his responsibilities." The chiefs exchanged uncertain glances. The king's voice became firm. "He was raised to become king. America cannot erase that." Still, deep inside, even King Obiora carried concerns. Prince Chima had always been stubborn. Even as a child, he challenged traditions fearlessly. While other royal children obeyed instructions immediately, Chima constantly asked questions. Why must things be done this way? What if the old ways are wrong? Why should poor people bow to rich people? The elders hated those questions. But Queen Ifeokunya secretly admired them. Now, the boy who once challenged palace customs had become a wealthy, educated man exposed to modern ideas from the Western world. King Obiora knew conflict was inevitable. Outside the palace gates, villagers had already gathered to welcome the prince home. Traditional drummers beat loudly while dancers dressed in colorful cultural attire performed joyfully in the open courtyard. Suddenly, one palace guard shouted loudly, "The prince has arrived." Excitement exploded instantly. A convoy of luxurious black SUVs rolled slowly toward the palace entrance while security escorts cleared the road ahead. Dust rose into the air as villagers screamed happily and waved. The first vehicle stopped. For a moment, the crowd became silent with anticipation. Then the door opened. Prince Chima stepped out. The women gasped immediately. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and strikingly handsome. His fitted black suit looked expensive enough to feed entire villages, while his dark sunglasses reflected the bright Enugu sunlight. A gold wristwatch glittered on his hand as he adjusted his suit calmly. Unlike many arrogant rich men, however, Chima carried himself with effortless confidence instead of pride. The drummers grew louder. "Prince Chima, our future king. Welcome home." The prince smiled warmly and removed his Prince Chima sunglasses. "It's good to be home," he said. The crowd erupted happily again. Some elderly women nearly cried with joy. Servants rushed forward immediately to collect his luggage while royal guards bowed respectfully. Inside the palace entrance, Queen Ifunanya stood waiting impatiently. The moment she saw her son, tears filled her eyes. "Chimamanda," she whispered emotionally. Chima's face softened instantly. "Mother." The queen embraced him tightly despite palace protocol demanding formality. You've become so thin, she complained immediately. Chima laughed. I literally own 3 restaurants in America. Then they are not feeding you properly. He kissed her forehead affectionately. I missed you too. Behind her, King Obiora slowly approached. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Unlike the queen's emotional warmth, the king carried royal authority naturally. Even at his age, his presence commanded instant respect. Chima straightened slightly before bowing his head respectfully. Father. King Obiora studied him carefully for several seconds. Then finally he smiled faintly. You have returned as a man. Chima nodded. I learned from the best. The king placed a hand firmly on his son's shoulder. The kingdom has waited for you. Servants led the prince inside while musicians continued celebrating outside. Everywhere Chima walked, people stared at him with admiration. The palace itself looked exactly as he remembered. Massive marble floors reflected the chandeliers hanging above. Ancient portraits of former kings lined the walls proudly, while palace guards stood motionless beside enormous carved pillars. Yet, despite the beauty around him, Chima noticed something else immediately. Nothing had changed. The same traditions, the same rigid rules, the same overwhelming expectations. As they entered the dining hall, royal servants hurried to prepare an elaborate feast. Plates of jollof rice, spicy goat meat nkubi, and grilled fish covered the long table while expensive bottles of wine stood nearby. Queen Ifunanya watched her son carefully as he ate. You still remember our food, she teased. Chima grinned. American food cannot compete with this. The queen smiled proudly, but King Obiara remained focused. How is the company in New York, he asked. Growing fast, Chima replied. We expanded into real estate last year. The king nodded approvingly. Chima had built an impressive business empire while abroad. Although he came from royalty and inherited enormous wealth, he insisted on building his own companies independently. That determination made the king proud. You have done well, King Obiara admitted. Thank you. But now your attention must return home. Chima paused slightly. What do you mean? The king calmly drank from his glass before answering. The kingdom needs its future ruler present. The prince leaned back slowly. I just arrived today, and responsibilities do not wait. Queen Ifunanya quickly interrupted before tension could grow. Let him rest first. The king nodded once. For tonight, after dinner celebrations continued across the palace grounds. Traditional dancers performed beside enormous bonfires, while wealthy businessmen, politicians, and village chiefs arrived to greet the prince personally. Many important families brought their daughters as well. Beautiful young women dressed elegantly smiled constantly around Chima, hoping to catch his attention. But the prince remained polite without showing real interest in any of them. At one point, his childhood friend Toby approached carrying 2 glasses of wine. You've caused serious problems already, Tobe joked. Chima laughed. How half the women in Enugu are suddenly planning accidental meetings with you. The prince shook his head amusingly. Let them rest. Tobe smirked. You've changed. So have you. No. Toba replied proudly. I still enjoy trouble. Both men laughed together. For a moment, Chima relaxed completely. This was home. Not the cold luxury of America. Not business meetings in skyscrapers. Not endless media attention. Here, despite the pressure surrounding him, life felt real again. Later that night, after most guests had left, a palace guard approached carefully. His Majesty requests your presence. Chima sighed quietly. It begins. The guard pretended not to hear. Inside the throne room, King Obiara sat alone waiting. The large hall felt unusually quiet now without musicians and guests. Moonlight filtered through tall palace windows while burning candles cast long shadows across the marble floor. Chima approached slowly. You wanted to see me? Yes. Sit. The prince obeyed cautiously. For several moments neither man spoke. Then finally the king broke the silence. You are 29 years old now. Chima blinked. That's usually how age works. King Obiara ignored the joke. You have built wealth. You have traveled the world. You have gained knowledge. And the king's expression became serious. It is time for marriage. The words landed heavily. Chima stared at him. Would I have chosen a bride suitable for you? The prince laughed awkwardly, waiting for the joke, but the king's face remained completely serious. You're serious? Yes. Chima sat upright immediately. Father, no. You have not even heard her name. I don't care. King Obiara's eyes narrowed slightly. You speak too quickly, because this is insane. The king's voice deepened. Mind your tone. Chima exhaled sharply and stood. You arranged my marriage without even discussing it with me. It is the duty of a king to secure the future of the throne. This isn't the 18th century. The king's jaw tightened instantly. Our traditions built this kingdom, and some traditions should evolve. Silence filled the room dangerously. Finally, the king spoke again. Princess Amara from the kingdom of Nui arrives tomorrow with her family. Chima stared at him in disbelief. Tomorrow you will meet her. I'm not marrying a stranger because of some outdated royal agreement. King Obiara rose slowly from his throne. His presence suddenly became overwhelming. This is bigger than your personal feelings. No, this is exactly about my feelings because it's my life. The king pointed his staff firmly against the floor. You are the crown prince of Umyuk, and I'm also a human being. The atmosphere became painfully tense. Outside, distant drums still echoed faintly from the celebration grounds, but inside the throne room anger simmered heavily between father and son. King Obiara stepped closer. You have spent too much time abroad. Chima laughed bitterly. Because I don't want an arranged marriage. Because you have forgotten responsibility. The prince shook his head slowly. No, father. I just believe marriage should involve love. The king's expression hardened immediately. Love does not sustain kingdoms. It sustains people. The older man turned away briefly before speaking again. According to our ancestral laws, the crown prince must marry before his 30th birthday. Chima frowned slightly, and King Obiara faced him fully. You turn 30 inches 4 months. A strange silence followed. Then realization slowly entered Chima's eyes. If you fail to marry before then, the king continued carefully, the throne passes to your cousin. The prince froze completely. That law still exists, yes. You're telling me I could lose the throne because I'm unmarried. The law was created centuries ago to ensure stability. Chima rubbed his forehead in frustration. This is unbelievable. It is tradition. No, Chima snapped. It's manipulation. The king's face darkened. Enough. But the prince was already angry now. You're forcing me into marriage because you're afraid of breaking ancient customs. And you are behaving like a spoiled child. The words echoed across the throne room. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then finally Chima stepped backwards slowly. I won't marry someone I don't love. King Obiara's expression remained cold and unreadable. You will meet Princess Amara tomorrow. And if I refuse, the king looked directly into his eyes. Then prepare to lose everything. Silence fell once more, heavy, painful, unavoidable. Chima stared at his father for several long seconds before finally turning away. Without another word, he walked toward the massive palace doors. But just before leaving, he stopped briefly. "You may control the throne, father," he said quietly. "But you cannot control my heart." Then he walked out alone. And for the first time since returning home to Enugu, Prince Chima realized that the greatest battle of his life had only just begun. The next morning, the entire royal palace of Umuokwe woke before sunrise. Servants hurried through the marble hallways, carrying flower vases, silver trays, and expensive fabrics, while royal guards polished their weapons until they gleamed beneath the early morning light. Today was important. Princess Amara was arriving. Inside the palace kitchen, cooks prepared enough food to feed an army. Large pots of spicy soup boiled over open fires, while the rich aroma of grilled meat drifted across the compound. Queen Ifunanya supervised everything personally. "No mistakes today," she instructed firmly. "Yes, Your Majesty," the servants replied together. But despite all the excitement around the palace, Prince Chima remained in a terrible mood. He sat alone on the balcony outside his room, wearing a simple black shirt and trousers, while staring silently at the distant hills surrounding Enugu. His best friend Tobe entered carrying a cup of coffee. "You look like somebody attending his own funeral," Tobe joked. Chima accepted the cup tiredly. "Maybe I am." Tobe sat beside him. "So the famous princess arrives today. I honestly don't care. You should at least pretend." Chima scoffed. "You know what annoys me most?" Tobe shrugged. "The fact that nobody asked what I wanted." "You're the crown prince," Tobe reminded him carefully. "Your life stopped belonging only to you a long time ago." "That's exactly the problem." For a moment, silence settled between them. Then Toby smirked slightly. "Well, maybe she'll surprise you." Chima gave him a flat look. "You sound like my mother." "I'm just saying there's a small chance she's beautiful. She could look like an angel and I still wouldn't want an arranged marriage." Tobe laughed. "Fair enough." Before either man could continue, palace drums suddenly echoed loudly outside. Boom, boom, boom. Toby stood immediately. "That must be them." Chima sighed deeply and rose from his chair. Wonderful. Outside the palace gates, villagers had gathered once again to witness royal history. Expensive vehicles rolled toward the entrance in a long convoy while palace guards stood in perfect formation. The first SUV stopped slowly. A driver rushed to open the door. Princess Amara stepped out gracefully. Instantly, whispers spread through the crowd. "She's beautiful. Look at her dress. She already looks like a queen." And truly, Amara was stunning. Her deep red designer gown shimmered beneath the sunlight like flowing wine. Diamond earrings sparkled beside her smooth face, while her expensive perfume lingered in the air even from a distance. She carried herself with elegance and confidence, but there was something else in her expression too. Pride. The kind that looked down on people without speaking. Her parents followed behind her, dressed in luxurious traditional-like outfits embroidered with gold. King Abiora stepped forward warmly. "Welcome to Umiak." Princess Amara bowed respectfully. "It is an honor, Your Majesty." Queen Ifeanyinwa smiled politely while studying the young woman carefully. She was beautiful, educated, wealthy, and clearly raised among royalty. On paper, she seemed perfect. Then Prince Chima finally appeared at the palace entrance. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Amara's eyes widened slightly as she looked at him. Even she had to admit he was far more handsome in person. Tall, confident, powerful, the kind of man who naturally commanded attention without trying. Chima, however, remained emotionally detached. "Princess Amara," King Obiara announced proudly. "This is my son, Prince Chima." Amara smiled elegantly. "It's a pleasure finally meeting you." Chima nodded politely. "Welcome to Umuke." Though his voice was Prince Chima, respectful, there was no warmth in it. Amara noticed immediately. Interesting, she thought. Most men practically worshipped her the moment they saw her, but this prince looked almost bored. That irritated her slightly. Inside the palace, a grand reception was held in honor of the visiting royal family. Wealthy chiefs and politicians filled the hall while traditional musicians played softly nearby. Throughout lunch, Amara spoke confidently about her education in London, her family businesses, and her charity foundations. Many people seemed impressed. Queen Ifunanya listened carefully, while occasionally glancing toward Chima. The prince barely spoke. Whenever Amara tried engaging him in conversation, his answers remained short and polite. Finally, King Obiara cleared his throat loudly. I believe the young couple should spend some private time together. Several chiefs nodded approvingly. Yes, let them talk. Future husband and wife must understand each other. Chima nearly rolled his eyes. Amara smiled calmly. I would like that. The king gestured toward the palace garden. You may walk there peacefully. Reluctantly, Chima stood. This way. Amara followed him outside, while several servants quietly watched with excitement. The palace garden was breathtaking during the afternoon. Beautiful flowers lined the stone pathways while fountains sparkled beneath the sunlight. Birds chirped softly from nearby trees as a cool breeze moved through the peaceful space. For several awkward moments, neither of them spoke. Then Amara finally broke the silence. You don't seem happy to see me. Chima glanced at her briefly. You're observant. She laughed lightly. And honest, too. I try to be. They continued walking slowly. Amara studied him carefully. I heard many stories about you in London. Hopefully none too terrible. Mostly about your businesses. She paused slightly. And your lifestyle. Chima smirked faintly. That sounds dangerous. You dated celebrities. So the internet claims. She folded her arms elegantly. Did you? Some rumors are exaggerated. Amara smiled knowingly. You avoid answering questions beautifully, and you ask very direct ones. I dislike wasting time. For the first time, Chima looked mildly interested. At least she's confident, he admitted silently. They eventually sat near a large fountain surrounded by flowers. Amara crossed her legs gracefully. So tell me honestly, she said. Do you hate the idea of this marriage because of me specifically? Or because it was arranged? Chima answered immediately. Because it was arranged. That response surprised her. You don't even know me. Exactly. Amara tilted her head slightly. In our world, marriage has always been about family alliances and legacy. And what about love? She shrugged calmly. Love can come later. Chima shook his head. That sounds sad. It sounds practical. The prince leaned back against the bench thoughtfully. I spent years abroad seeing people choose partners because they genuinely connected. And many of those marriages still end in divorce. Amara replied smoothly. He laughed unexpectedly. Fair point. For a brief moment, the tension between them softened. Then footsteps approached nearby. A young palace servant walked toward them, carefully carrying a silver tray filled with fruit drinks. The girl looked nervous. She was probably no older than 18. Why, your highnesses, she stammered softly. I brought refreshments. Amara barely looked at her. Finally, the servant carefully handed Chima his drink first. Thank you, he said kindly. The girl smiled nervously before turning toward Amara. But just as she stepped forward, her foot caught against the edge of a stone pathway. Everything happened instantly. The tray tilted violently. Bright red juice spilled directly across Princess Amara's expensive designer gown. Silence. Complete silence. The servant froze in horror. Amara slowly looked down at her ruined dress. The red stains spread visibly across the fabric. Her face darkened immediately. "Oh my God!" The servant dropped to her knees instantly. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Your Highness." Chima immediately stood. "It's okay." But Amara exploded. "Are you blind?" The young girl trembled violently. I I didn't mean to. This dress costs more money than your entire family will ever see." The servant began crying. "Forgive me, please." Chima frowned deeply. She said it was an accident. Amara ignored him completely. "You stupid girl," she snapped angrily. "Look what you've done." Then, suddenly to Chima's disbelief, Amara shoved the tray violently away. The metal cups crashed loudly across the garden floor. The servant flinched in fear. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered again through tears. Amara's eyes burned with fury. "Sorry," she repeated coldly. "Sorry cannot fix this." Then she did something that shocked even the nearby guards. She kicked the servant harshly against her side. The girl cried out painfully and fell sideways onto the grass. Chima's entire expression changed instantly. "Enough." His voice thundered across the garden. Amara looked at him angrily. "She ruined my dress. And you assaulted her. She's a servant." The words came out with pure disgust. Chima stared at her in disbelief. "So that makes her less human?" Amara stood immediately. She should know how to do her job properly. She made a mistake, and now she should face consequences. The servant remained crying quietly on the ground while nearby guards looked horrified, but too afraid to interfere. Chima helped the young girl stand gently. "Are you hurt?" She nodded weakly, unable to speak. Amara folded her arms. "You're comforting her." The prince slowly faced her. "Yes." Her voice became sharper. "You embarrassed me over a maid. You embarrassed yourself." Amara's eyes widened. "What did you say? You heard me." The atmosphere suddenly became dangerously tense. For the first time in years, nobody had spoken to Amara this way. She was used to admiration, submission, fear, not criticism, especially not from a man expected to marry her. "You dare insult me because of a servant?" she snapped. Chima's jaw tightened. "No, I'm insulting you because of your behavior." Amara laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable and you're cruel." The words hit hard. For several seconds neither moved. Then Amara stepped closer angrily. "You think acting like some humble hero makes you morally superior?" "No," Chima replied calmly. "I just think powerful people should treat others with dignity." "She embarrassed me publicly, and your response was violence." Amara scoffed loudly. "You spent too much time in America, and you spent too much time believing wealth makes you important." The princess looked genuinely furious now. "How dare you?" Chima stared directly into her eyes. "You know what's funny? My father thinks this meeting is supposed to convince me to marry you." Her expression hardened. "And now, I know I absolutely never will." Silence crashed between them. The words clearly wounded her pride. Without another word, Chima turned toward the crying servant. "Come with me," he said gently. The girl obeyed shakily. Amara watched them walk away with disbelief burning across her beautiful face. Nobody had ever rejected her before. Nobody. Inside the palace, later that evening, tension spread quickly. Servants whispered nervously through the hallways while rumors traveled from room to room. The prince shouted at her. She kicked a servant. "The marriage may fail." Inside her guest chamber, Amara paced furiously while her mother tried calming her down. "That arrogant prince humiliated me." Her mother sighed tiredly. "You should not have kicked the servant. She ruined my dress." "So, you're royalty. Control yourself." Amara crossed her arms stubbornly. "He treated me like I was the villain." Meanwhile, Inside another section of the palace, Chima stood before his father once again. King Obiora's face looked dangerously serious. "I heard there was trouble." Chima answered immediately, "I will not marry her." The king's eyes narrowed. "You reached this decision after one conversation." "I reached it after watching her abuse someone weaker." The king's eyes narrowed. "Then herself." Queen Ifunanya listened silently nearby. King Obiora exhaled slowly. She lost her temper. She revealed her character. The king's expression hardened. "You are being emotional, and you are ignoring a major warning sign. Marriage requires compromise, not with cruelty." Father and son stared at each other again. The same stubbornness, the same pride, the same refusal to surrender. And somewhere deep inside the palace walls of Umyuk, destiny quietly began changing direction forever. The atmosphere inside the royal palace of Umyuk changed completely after the incident in the garden. What was supposed to be the beginning of a royal love story had turned into whispers, tension, and silent embarrassment. Servants moved cautiously through the hallways, afraid to speak too loudly. Palace guards exchanged uneasy glances, while chiefs quietly discussed the shocking argument between Prince Chima and Princess Amara. Nobody expected things to go this badly, especially not King Obiora. Early the next morning, the palace dining hall felt unusually cold despite the rich aroma of breakfast filling the air. Princess Amara sat beside her parents wearing another expensive gown, though her expression remained stiff with anger. Across from them sat Queen Ifunanya, who tried desperately to maintain peace. But the empty chair beside the king spoke volumes. Prince Chima had refused to attend breakfast. Amara's father, Chief Edwin, cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm sure the young people simply misunderstood each other." Nobody answered immediately. Princess Amara carefully sipped tea before speaking coldly. "Your son insulted me publicly." Queen Ifunanya sighed softly. "And you kicked a servant." Amara's jaw tightened instantly. "She destroyed my dress. She made a mistake." The queen replied calmly. Amara looked offended by the correction. Before she could answer again, King Obiara entered the dining hall. Every servant immediately bowed. The king looked exhausted already. "Good morning," he said firmly. The greetings around the table sounded weak and uncomfortable. King Obiara sat slowly before looking around. "Where is Chima?" One servant bowed nervously. "His Highness left the palace very early this morning." The king frowned deeply. "Left for where?" "We do not know, Your Majesty." Amara scoffed softly under her breath. Queen Ifunanya noticed immediately. "Princess," she warned gently. But Amara was no longer trying to hide her irritation. "With all due respect," she said carefully, "your son behaves more like a rebellious schoolboy than a future king." King Obiara's expression darkened slightly. "He is passionate. He is disrespectful." Silence fell across the table. The king finally spoke. "My son values kindness greatly." Amara folded her arms elegantly. "And I value discipline. You assaulted a servant. She embarrassed me, and your response embarrassed everyone else." The princess looked stunned that even the king criticized her actions. Her mother quickly intervened. "I believe emotions were simply high yesterday." Queen Ifunanya nodded politely. "Yes, perhaps the young couple only needs more time together." But deep inside, the queen already sensed the truth. This marriage would never happen peacefully. Meanwhile, far from the palace, Prince Chima walked alone through the streets of Enugu. For the first time, since returning from the United States, he felt suffocated by palace life. Every conversation revolved around responsibility, tradition, duty, marriage, the throne. Nobody cared about what he actually wanted. Children played football beside dusty roads as traders shouted prices from crowded market stalls. Motorcycles sped past recklessly while music blasted from small roadside shops. Real life, not the carefully controlled environment of the palace. Chima stopped beside a roadside food stand where an elderly woman sold roasted yam and fish. The woman looked up and nearly dropped her spoon. "Your Highness." The prince smiled gently. "Good morning, Mama." She immediately tried cleaning the plastic chair with her wrapper. "Please sit." Chima laughed softly and sat down. "You don't need to panic around me." The woman shook her head. "A prince eating here. Ah, the ancestors must be watching." He ordered food anyway. Within minutes, people nearby began whispering excitedly. "The prince is here. He's eating ordinary roadside food. He really returned from America." Chima ignored the attention peacefully. This was what he missed while abroad. Simple human connection, not forced palace. Politeness. As he ate quietly, his thoughts drifted back to Princess Amara. Beautiful, educated, elegant. On paper, she was perfect. But the way she treated that servant haunted him deeply. Not because of the spilled drink, but because of the complete lack of compassion afterward. The anger, the cruelty, the entitlement, and worst of all, nobody else in the palace seemed shocked enough by it. To them, it was simply a princess disciplining a servant. That realization disturbed him more than he expected. Back at the palace, King Obiara summoned the royal council urgently. Inside the enormous council chamber, elderly chiefs sat in a large circle, wearing richly embroidered traditional robes. The atmosphere was tense immediately. One elder spoke first. "The situation is becoming dangerous." Another nodded. "The alliance with Princess Amara's kingdom is important." King Obiara remained silent. A third chief leaned forward carefully. "Your son must understand that this marriage is not merely personal. It concerns politics." Another added trade agreements, royal unity, stability. Finally, the king spoke quietly. "I know." One elder frowned deeply. "With respect, Your Majesty, perhaps the prince spent too many years outside our culture." The king's eyes narrowed immediately. "My son is still Igbo." "Yes," the elder replied carefully. "But America changes people." The room grew thoughtful. Another chief sighed heavily. "The ancient law remains clear. If the crown prince is unmarried before 30, the throne passes to the next eligible bloodline. And the people know this." Someone else added, "That law cannot be ignored." King Obiara closed his eyes briefly. That was the true problem, not just the marriage itself, but the consequences surrounding it. The law of the ancestors was sacred. Generations ago, the kingdom experienced civil war, after an unmarried prince died suddenly without heirs. Since then, every future ruler had been required to marry before turning 30 to guarantee stability. Breaking that law would create chaos. The council feared it, and so did the king. But what troubled King Obiara most was something he refused to admit aloud. Part of him understood Chima. Deep down, he too disliked Amara's behavior. But kings were not allowed to lead with emotion, or at least that was what he had always believed. Later that afternoon, Chima finally returned to the palace. The moment he entered the main hall, a palace guard approached nervously. "His Majesty wishes to see you immediately." "Of course he does," Chima muttered. Inside the throne room, King Obiara stood beside the large palace windows with his hands behind his back. He did not turn immediately when Chima entered. "You embarrassed this family yesterday." Chima sighed tiredly. "She kicked an innocent girl." The king finally faced him. "And you publicly humiliated a royal guest." "She deserved it." "That is not your decision alone." Chima crossed his arms. "So I'm expected to ignore bad behavior because she's wealthy and royal. You are expected to think beyond emotion." The prince laughed bitterly. Funny everyone keeps saying that. King Obiora's patience thinned visibly. You speak like a man without responsibilities, and you speak like power matters more than humanity. The king stepped closer slowly. You think ruling a kingdom is easy. I think compassion matters. Compassion without discipline creates weakness, and power without compassion creates monsters. The words echoed sharply across the throne room. For a moment, silence filled the space. Then the king spoke again, quieter this time. You are risking your future over pride. Chima shook his head. No, father. I'm protecting my future. King Obiora frowned deeply. She is suitable. She is cruel. She comes from a respected royal bloodline, and she treats poor people like animals. The king's jaw tightened. You judged her too quickly, and you judged her by status instead of character. Neither man backed down. The tension between them thickened painfully. Finally, King Obiora pointed toward the throne. One day you will sit there. Chima looked at it silently. That throne requires sacrifice. The prince answered quietly. Maybe some sacrifices aren't worth making. The king's voice hardened again. You are heir to generations of kings, and I never asked for that. The outburst shocked even the servants outside the room. Chima exhaled heavily afterward, frustration pouring from him. For 7 years he continued. Everybody talked about what I owe this kingdom. Nobody asked what I want for my own life. The king stared at him carefully. Kings do not belong to themselves. That sounds miserable. It is duty. No, Chima snapped. It's imprisonment dressed as honor. The words hit hard. King Obiora's face became dangerously cold. You speak carelessly and you refuse to listen. The king pointed firmly toward him. You will marry Princess Amara. No. The answer came instantly. Flat. Fearless. The king looked stunned for a second. What did? You say I said no. You would defy your king. I would refuse a miserable marriage. King Obiora's anger finally exploded. You are behaving like a spoiled child, and you're trying to control my entire future. The king slammed his staff against the marble floor. Boom! The sound echoed thunderously. If you refuse this marriage, you risk losing the throne. Chima stepped closer without fear. Then maybe the throne should go to someone else. Silence. Complete silence. Even the air inside the room seemed frozen. The king stared at his son in disbelief. You would abandon your birthright if keeping it means marrying someone I cannot respect. Yes. The words pierced deeper than Chima realized because, despite everything, King Obiora genuinely loved his son, and hearing him speak so casually about abandoning the throne felt almost like betrayal. You don't understand what you're saying, the king whispered. I understand perfectly. You would throw away centuries of legacy. I would rather lose a crown than lose myself. For several painful seconds, father and son simply stared at each other. Two stubborn men, two generations, two completely different visions of leadership. Finally, King Obiora spoke again. Quieter now. When I was young, I also wanted freedom. Chima blinked, slightly surprised. The king rarely spoke about himself. But becoming king means carrying burdens, whether you like them or not. The prince's expression softened slightly. Did you love mother before marriage? A strange silence followed. Then slowly, the king answered. No. Chima frowned. I respected her family. I respected tradition. Love came later. And if it never came, King Obiach Buspray. And if it never, I answered. Acetation alone answered everything. Chima shook his head sadly. I don't want that life. The king looked away briefly, toward the palace window. Shomos outside the kingdom moved normally beneath the afternoon sun. People laughing, trading, living, depending on the stability of the crown. Finally, the king faced his son once more. You have 4 months before your 30th birthday. Chima remained silent. If you are unmarried by then, the council will legally remove you as heir. I know. And once that happens, there may be no reversing it. The prince nodded slowly. Still calm, still. Stubborn. King Obiara studied him carefully. You truly mean this? Yes. You would rather lose the throne than marry Princess Amara. Chima answered without hesitation. Yes. The king inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, fear entered his heart. Not fear of losing power, but fear of losing his son completely. Meanwhile, somewhere else inside the palace, Queen Ifeanya stood silently outside the throne room doors, listening to everything. And deep inside her heart, she already knew something important. This battle was far from over. And destiny was preparing to bring someone completely unexpected into Prince Chima's life. For 3 days after his explosive argument with King Obiora, Prince Chima avoided almost everyone inside the palace. The tension had become unbearable. Every hallway felt heavy with judgment. Servants lowered their voices whenever he passed, while royal chiefs watched him with visible disappointment. Even the palace guards looked uncomfortable around him now. Worst of all, Princess Amara and her family were still staying at the palace. Though she and Chima avoided each other completely, her presence alone irritated him deeply. Everywhere he turned, he heard whispers. The prince is becoming rebellious. He may lose the throne. He embarrassed the royal family. Only Queen Ifeanya remained gentle toward him. One evening, she entered his room quietly, carrying a tray of food herself. You haven't eaten properly all day, she said softly. Chima sat near the balcony wearing simple black trousers and a loose shirt, staring at the dark hills beyond the palace walls. I'm not hungry. The queen placed the tray down anyway. That has never stopped me from feeding you before. Despite his frustration, Chima smiled faintly. His mother sat beside him quietly for a while before finally speaking. You and your father are too similar. Chima scoffed softly. That's terrifying. It's true. The queen sighed tiredly. You both believe you are always right. He leaned back heavily in his chair. Mother, am I wrong for refusing this marriage? Queen Ifeanya studied him carefully. I think you are trying to protect your happiness. And father thinks I'm destroying my future. The queen looked toward the palace courtyard below. Your father carries the weight of this kingdom every day. Sometimes that burden makes him afraid of change. Chima remained silent. Then he spoke quietly. I could never marry someone like Amara. The queen nodded slowly. I know. That answer surprised him slightly. Queen Ifeanya smiled faintly. She is beautiful and intelligent, but beauty without kindness becomes dangerous. Chima exhaled deeply. Then, why won't father see it? Because kings often think about kingdoms before people. Her voice carried sadness now. But happiness matters too. For several moments, silence settled peacefully between them. Then the queen touched his shoulder gently. Go outside tomorrow. Chima frowned slightly. Outside? You've trapped yourself inside this palace since returning from America. I've been busy fighting for my freedom, and it's exhausting you. She smiled softly. Sometimes clarity comes when you leave the noise behind. The next morning, Chima decided to follow her advice. Very early, before the palace became crowded with advisors and chiefs, he left quietly, wearing plain clothes instead of royal attire. No guards, no assistants, no luxury vehicles, just him alone. The morning air in Enugu felt fresh and alive as he walked through narrow village roads surrounded by tall palm trees and small mud houses. Women swept their compounds while smoke rose from outdoor kitchens preparing breakfast. Children ran barefoot through dusty roads laughing loudly. Unlike palace life, Nobody here cared about royal politics first thing in the morning. Life simply continued. As Chima walked deeper into the village, he noticed something unusual ahead. A crowd had gathered near a cluster of very tall palm trees. People stood watching something with excitement. Curious, he moved closer. "What's happening?" he asked an elderly man nearby. The old man laughed. "You've never seen Ada work before." Chima frowned slightly. "Ada?" The man pointed upward proudly. "There." Chima followed his finger and froze. High above the ground, balanced dangerously between the branches of a massive palm tree, was a young woman. She moved with shocking confidence. One hand gripped the rough trunk while the other expertly controlled a rope tied around her waist. A large container hung beside her as she carefully collected fresh palm wine. The villagers below watched with admiration. "She climbs faster than most men. Fearless girl. She inherited her father's strength." Chima couldn't stop staring. The woman's body was muscular and athletic from years of hard labor. Sweat glistened against her dark skin beneath the early morning sunlight while her wrapper was tied firmly around her waist for easier movement. There was nothing delicate or royal about her. Yet somehow she commanded attention more naturally than any wealthy woman he had ever met. Even from below he could see the determination in every movement she made. Then suddenly one villager shouted upward, "Ada, be careful." The branch beneath her shifted dangerously. Several people gasped. But instead of panicking, the woman adjusted instantly and stabilized herself with incredible balance. The crowd cheered loudly. Chima found himself smiling unexpectedly. Minutes later, she finally descended the tree with practiced skill and landed firmly on the ground carrying 2 containers filled with fresh palm wine. The villagers immediately approached her. "Ada, sell for me. I came first. I need 2 bottles." She laughed while pushing sweaty braids away from her face. "One at a time before all of you scatter my head this morning." Her voice carried confidence and humor naturally as she sold palm wine to customers. Chima continued watching quietly. Something about her fascinated him immediately. Not beauty alone, though she was beautiful in a strong, natural way. It was her energy, her fearlessness, the complete absence of pretense. Eventually, Ada noticed him standing there. Unlike everyone else, however, she showed absolutely no sign of nervousness. Instead, she narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "You've been staring at me for a very long time." Several villagers suddenly became alarmed after realizing who he was. "Ah, Your Highness." People quickly bowed respectfully, but Ada remained standing normally. Chima almost laughed. "You recognized me," she shrugged casually. "The whole kingdom knows the prince returned from America." One elderly woman whispered urgently, "Ada, kneel." But Ada ignored her completely. Chima found that even more interesting. "You climb very well," he said. She wiped sweat from her forehead. "That's usually the point of climbing." A few villagers nearly fainted from her tone, but instead of feeling offended, Chima smiled slightly. "You always speak this directly. You always stare at strangers this boldly." The prince laughed softly. For the first time in days, the heaviness inside him eased slightly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ada. I'm Chima." "I know." A small silence followed. Then Ada lifted 1 container of palm wine. "Are you buying or only asking questions?" Chima raised an eyebrow. "You sell to princes too." "I sell to anybody with money." Again the villagers looked horrified by her boldness. But Chima enjoyed it. "Fine," he replied. "Give me 1 bottle." Ada handed it to him carelessly. As he reached for the drink, he noticed scars on her hands. Work scars, the kind earned through years of physical labor. Not soft palace life. "You do this every day?" he asked. "Unless you know another magical way to survive." The answer carried dry humor, but also quiet truth. One old man nearby sighed sadly, "She works harder than 10 men." Another woman added softly, "Since her parents died, she has taken care of herself alone." Chima looked at Ada again. "You're an orphan." Her expression changed immediately. The playful energy faded slightly. "Yes. I'm sorry." She shrugged again, though this time the movement looked heavier. "Sorry doesn't feed anybody." That answer stayed with him. The villagers slowly dispersed after buying palm wine, leaving Ada arranging her containers beneath the tree. Most people would have left after the conversation ended, but Chima remained standing there. Ada noticed immediately, "You're still here. You seem disappointed." "I'm confused." "About what?" "Why a billionaire prince is wandering villages alone talking to palm wine tappers." Chima leaned casually against the tree. "Maybe palace life is boring." Ada snorted softly. "Poor rich man." He laughed again. "You enjoy insulting people. I enjoy honesty." The prince studied her carefully. "And honesty says, 'What about me?'" Ada tied another container firmly before answering. "Honestly, yes. You look tired." The answer surprised him, not because it was rude, because it was true. For several seconds, Chima said nothing. Ada continued working calmly. "You carry yourself like somebody fighting invisible battles," she added casually. The prince stared at her. Nobody inside the palace had noticed that, or maybe they had simply ignored it. But this village woman who barely knew him saw it immediately. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. Ada shrugged. "People who work hard recognize exhaustion." A strange silence settled between them. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Then one little boy suddenly ran toward Ada excitedly. "Ada, Mama said thank you for helping yesterday." Ada smiled warmly and handed him a small cup of palm wine foam playfully. "Tell your mother to rest her leg properly." The boy grinned and ran away again. Chima watched the interaction curiously. "You help people?" Ada looked confused. "Is that surprising?" "No," he admitted. "Just different from what I'm used to lately." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You speak in puzzles. Maybe because my life currently feels like one." Ada lifted another container onto her shoulder effortlessly. "Well, Your Highness, I have actual work to do." Chima instinctively reached toward the heavy container. "Let me help." She looked genuinely offended. "You think I can't carry it?" "No, I was trying to be polite. I've carried these since I was 16. Then, before he could respond, she effortlessly lifted both containers and began walking down the dusty road. Chima watched her in disbelief. The woman was unbelievably strong. Halfway down the road, Ada suddenly looked back. "You're coming or not?" The prince blinked. "What?" "You bought palm wine. Unless rich people in America stopped drinking." He laughed, loudly, and followed her. As they walked together through the village roads, people stared openly. Some looked shocked. Others looked amused. A prince walking casually beside a female palm wine tapper was not something anybody expected to see. "You're causing gossip already," Chima warned jokingly. Ada shrugged carelessly. "People gossip when they're bored." "You don't care what others think. I stopped caring a long time ago." How she adjusted the container on her shoulder. "When you grow up, poor people criticize you no matter what you do." Chima listened quietly. So eventually she continued, "You either break or stop apologizing for existing." The words hit him harder than expected, because deep down that was exactly what he had been struggling with inside the palace. Constant pressure to become what others wanted. For the first time since returning home, he felt strangely understood by a woman carrying palm wine through a dusty village road. Neither of them realized it yet. But somewhere between the palace walls of Umuak and the quiet roads of rural Enugu, destiny had finally introduced them. After meeting Ada, something inside Prince Chima changed. For the first time since returning to Enugu, he woke up feeling lighter. The constant pressure from the palace still existed. The arranged marriage issue still remained unresolved. The royal council still watched him carefully like a ticking disaster waiting to explode. But somehow his mind kept returning to one person, Ada, the stubborn female palm wine tapper who spoke to him like he was an ordinary man instead of a prince. The memory of her balancing fearlessly on top of those tall palm trees replayed in his mind constantly. Even her voice stayed with him. "You look tired." Nobody else had noticed that exhaustion hiding beneath his confidence, not even himself. The next morning, Chima sat at the palace dining table pretending to eat breakfast while Queen Ifunanya watched him carefully. "You're smiling at your tea," she observed calmly. Chima blinked. "I am not." "You are." He quickly hid his expression. The queen almost laughed. "Interesting. Very interesting." Before she could question him further, King Obiara entered the dining hall dressed in regal traditional dining hall attire. Instantly the atmosphere shifted. Servants straightened nervously. The king sat down heavily. "Where are you going today?" he asked Chima directly. The prince calmly drank water first. "Out." King Obiara frowned. "Out where?" "Around the village. You spend too much time wandering lately. And too much time inside this palace makes me lose my sanity." The king's jaw tightened. Queen Ifananya quickly interrupted before another argument began. "Fresh air is healthy." King Obiara ignored her comment. "The council wishes to meet you later about Princess Amara." Chima immediately lost his appetite. "I already gave my answer. The kingdom requires more than childish stubbornness." The prince slowly looked up. "And the kingdom requires more than forcing people into miserable marriages." Silence fell again. Queen Ifananya rubbed her forehead tiredly. These two men would eventually destroy the palace with arguments. Finally, Chima stood. "I'll return before evening." Without waiting for permission, he left. King Obiara watched him disappear, with visible frustration. "He grows more rebellious every day." The queen sipped tea calmly. "No," she corrected softly. "He grows more honest." Meanwhile, several kilometers away from the palace, Ada was already halfway up a palm tree before sunrise. The morning breeze moved through the branches while birds chirped loudly nearby. Below her, several men watched with amazement. "I still don't understand how she climbs faster than us. One day she'll become stronger than all the men in this village." Ada overheard them and laughed. One day she shouted from above, "Too late." The men burst into laughter. Unlike many women in the village, Ada had stopped caring years ago about behaving softly to protect men's egos. Life had been too difficult for softness. After her parents died, survival became more important than public opinion. At first, villagers mocked her mercilessly. "A woman cannot tap palm wine. She should marry instead. She disgraces tradition." But none of those people offered to feed her, so Ada ignored them all and learned her father's trade anyway. Now even the same men who once mocked her respected her strength. As Ada climbed down carrying fresh palm wine containers, she noticed a familiar figure approaching through the dusty road. Prince Chima. Again. She narrowed her eyes immediately. "You came back." The prince smiled casually. "You sound disappointed. You're becoming suspicious." "How?" "You're a prince who keeps appearing in villages for no reason." Chima laughed softly. "Maybe I enjoy your company." Ada snorted. "You barely know me." "True." He glanced toward the trees. "But you're more interesting than most people I know." She handed a container to one customer before answering. That sounds like an insult to your rich friends. Maybe it is. A few nearby villagers exchanged curious glances. The prince returning again so soon was already becoming gossip material. One old woman whispered excitedly to another, "He likes her." Hush. But Ada overheard them anyway and rolled her eyes. "You people should find jobs." Chima laughed. Again, that laugh surprised her slightly. Most wealthy men she encountered carried arrogance like perfume. But Chima laughed easily, naturally, like somebody starving for peace. "Did you buy palm wine today?" she asked. "Or are you only here to disturb my work again I came to buy?" She folded her arms suspiciously. "You don't even look like somebody who drinks palm wine regularly." "You judging me, I'm observing." The prince leaned slightly closer. "And what have you observed?" Ada looked him over carefully. "You're too polished." "That sounds offensive." "Your hands are soft." "I own companies, not farms." "You walk like somebody who has never carried firewood." Chima grinned. "Anything else?" "Yes." She pointed at his expensive wristwatch. "That watch alone could probably buy half this village." The prince looked at the watch briefly. "You notice details. When you grow up poor, you learn to notice expensive things quickly." For a second, something quieter entered her voice. Not envy, just reality. Chima noticed immediately. "You don't like rich people very much, do you?" Ada shrugged. "Rich people usually don't notice poor people unless they need something." "That's unfair." "Is it?" The question lingered between them. Chima could not honestly answer immediately, because deep down he knew she wasn't completely wrong. Eventually, Ada handed him a bottle of fresh palm wine. "Drink." He took one sip and nearly coughed. She burst into laughter instantly. "Oh my goodness, that's strong. It's palm wine, not fruit juice." Several nearby villagers laughed too. Chima wiped his mouth while shaking his head. "You're enjoying this too much. You rich people suffer beautifully." The prince stared at her dramatically. "You insult me constantly, and yet you keep returning." Fair point. Later that afternoon, Ada carried several containers toward the village market while Chima walked beside her despite receiving endless stares from villagers. "You know people are gossiping already," Ada warned. "They already gossip about me anyway." "Not like this." "What are they saying?" She smirked slightly. "That the prince has suddenly become interested in palm wine business." He laughed. "Maybe I should invest." "You wouldn't survive 1 week doing this work." "You doubt me too much." "I believe reality." Chima suddenly stopped walking. "Teach me then." Ada blinked. "Teach you what?" "How to tap palm wine." For 2 full seconds, she simply stared at him. Then she burst into uncontrollable laughter. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. The kind that bent her slightly forward. "You," she gasped between laughs, "climb palm trees." "Yes. You'll fall and break every royal bone in your body." "I'm serious." Ada wiped tears from her eyes. "Prince Chima Okafor wants to become a palm wine tapper." "When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous." "Because it is ridiculous." But strangely, she liked the idea. Not because she thought he could actually do it, but because no prince had ever shown genuine interest in her world before. Most rich men looked at village workers with hidden pity or superiority. Chima looked curious instead. That difference mattered. The next morning, Ada agreed to teach him, though mostly for entertainment. "This is a terrible idea," she announced as they stood beneath one of the smaller palm trees outside the village. Chima rolled up his sleeves confidently. "You're underestimating me." "No," she corrected. "I'm understanding gravity." The prince ignored her and grabbed the rough tree trunk awkwardly. Immediately Ada began laughing again. You climb like a confused goat. I literally just started. You're already disappointing the ancestors. He glared at her while struggling upward. The bark scraped his palms painfully. How do you do this every day by not being soft? I'm not soft. Ada pointed at his hands. Your palms disagree. After several embarrassing attempts, Chima finally climbed halfway before slipping slightly. Ada instantly grabbed the rope tied around his waist to stabilize him. Careful. For one brief moment, their faces ended up unexpectedly close. Chima looked down at her. Ada suddenly became aware of how attractive he actually was. Not just handsome, warm, alive. His eyes carried intelligence mixed with stubbornness, and when he smiled it affected her more than she wanted. Quickly, she stepped back. You're heavy, she muttered. The prince smirked. You caught me. Unfortunately, but her heartbeat had changed slightly now, and she hated noticing it. Over the following days, Chima kept returning. Sometimes he helped Ada carry containers. Other times he simply sat nearby watching her work while talking for hours. Slowly they learned more about each other. Ada discovered Chima loved old highlife music and hated arrogant wealthy people despite being rich himself. Chima learned Ada secretly enjoyed reading books borrowed from the village teacher whenever she found free time. One evening they sat beside a small river eating roasted corn while the sunset painted the sky orange. You never answered something, Ada said quietly. What? Why are you really here? Chima looked toward the water silently. Finally he answered honestly. Because when I'm with you, I can breathe. Ada frowned slightly. That sounds dramatic. It's true. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the river. Inside the palace, everybody sees the future king. And here you just see me. For once, Ada had no teasing response ready, because deep down she understood exactly what he meant. After a long silence, she spoke quietly. You know this friendship is dangerous. Chima turned toward her. Why? You're a prince. And you're Ada. That's exactly the problem. He studied her carefully. Does my title scare you, no? That answer came instantly. And honestly. Ada looked away toward the river. What scares me is forgetting you belong to a completely different world. Chima's expression softened. Maybe for the first time in years somebody saw beyond his wealth and status completely. Not the prince, not the billionaire, just the man. And somewhere deep inside both of them something had already started growing. Neither wanted to admit it yet. But destiny had already begun quietly weaving their hearts together beneath the skies of Anagu. By the second week of knowing Ada, Prince Chima realized something dangerous was happening to him. He looked forward to seeing her more than anything else in his life. Not royal meetings, not business calls from the United States, not expensive dinners, not palace celebrations, just Ada, the stubborn palm wine tapper, with strong hands and fearless eyes. Every morning he found excuses to leave the palace earlier. Sometimes he claimed he was studying the kingdom. Other times he simply ignored everybody and disappeared before breakfast. King Obiara noticed immediately. One evening while Chima prepared to leave again, the king stopped him inside the palace corridor. You spend very little time at home lately. Chima adjusted the sleeve of his shirt calmly. I'm still in the kingdom. That is not what I asked. The prince remained silent. King Obiara stepped closer. The council members are beginning to complain. They complain about everything. You are the future king, and future kings cannot walk outside. The king's face hardened. Slightly. You know this is bigger than ordinary movement. Chima already understood what his father truly meant. Rumors had started spreading. At first, villagers only whispered curiously about the prince visiting rural areas constantly. But now people were connecting the rumors to Ada, the female palm wine tapper, the orphan, the village girl. The situation was becoming impossible to hide. "You are spending time with somebody," King Obiara said, carefully. Chima's jaw tightened. "And if I am?" The king studied him closely. "You forget that people watch everything a prince does." "That sounds exhausting." "It is reality." Chima exhaled slowly. For once, he did not argue because deep down he knew his father was right. A future king could not simply fall in love with anyone, especially not someone like Ada, but that realization only frustrated him more. Why should love depend on social class? Why should status matter more than character? Why did the world insist on turning human beings into categories? Rich, poor, royal, commoner. Worthy, unworthy. He hated it. And somehow, Ada made him hate it even more, because she represented everything the palace would reject immediately. That same afternoon, Chima arrived at the village to find Ada arguing loudly with three older men near the palm trees. "You cannot continue climbing alone during rainy season," one man complained. Ada folded her arms stubbornly. "And who exactly will feed me if I stop? It's dangerous. So is hunger." The men sighed heavily. One finally noticed Chima approaching and immediately bowed respectfully. "Your Highness." Ada rolled her eyes. "You people bow too much." The prince smiled slightly. "What happened? These old men suddenly think I'm fragile." "You almost slipped yesterday," one villager argued. Ada pointed accusingly. "I slipped once. You nearly broke your neck." Chima frowned slightly. "You fell." Ada immediately looked annoyed. "I did not fall." The villagers stared at her. "You screamed." "That branch betrayed me." Chima tried not to laugh. Ada glared at everybody equally. "You all behave like I'm 80 years old." One old woman passing nearby muttered loudly, "That girl will argue with God himself one day." The villagers burst into laughter. Even Chima laughed openly now. Ada shook her head dramatically. "Wonderful. Everybody enjoys mocking me. You make it easy." Chima admitted. She narrowed her eyes at him. "You're becoming annoying, but entertaining." Ada picked up her rope and container. "I'm working. Try not to distract me." Chima followed behind casually. Too late. As they walked deeper into the palm groves together, the peaceful atmosphere slowly settled around them again. Tall trees swayed gently while sunlight filtered through the leaves above. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Ada suddenly asked quietly, "Why do you keep coming back?" Chima glanced toward her. "You've asked me that before, and you still haven't answered properly." The prince walked slowly beside her. "What if I simply enjoy being here?" Ada shook her head. No prince abandons luxury repeatedly just to sit under trees with a palm wine tapper. "Maybe this palm wine tapper is interesting." She snorted softly. "You really like trouble." Chima smiled. "That makes two of us." But despite the teasing, Ada's question lingered inside him long after. Why did he keep returning? At first, curiosity explained it, then friendship. But now it was becoming something far more dangerous. Because lately, when he looked at Ada, he noticed things differently. The strength in her arms while lifting heavy containers. The tiny scar near her eyebrow. The way her eyes softened whenever children greeted her. Even her laughter affected him now. And that realization terrified him slightly. Meanwhile, Ada was fighting her own internal battle. She had spent years surviving alone, years building emotional walls strong enough to protect herself from disappointment. Men rarely approached her romantically. Some feared her strength, others mocked her profession. And wealthy men that usually treated village women like temporary entertainment. So no matter how kind Chima seemed, part of Ada remained cautious. Very cautious. That evening, heavy rain suddenly began falling while Ada worked near one of the tallest palm trees. Thunder echoed across the sky as villagers hurried home. One woman shouted, "Leave the tree," but Ada ignored her. "If I don't finish today, tomorrow's customers will complain." Rain poured harder. The tree bark became dangerously slippery. Below, Chima arrived just as Ada climbed higher carrying her tapping tools. His expression changed instantly. "What are you doing?" Ada shouted downward through the rain. "Working. You'll fall." "I won't." Almost immediately after saying that, her foot slipped violently. Several villagers screamed. Ada grabbed the tree desperately before completely losing balance. Her sharp knife sliced across her palm during the struggle. Chima rushed forward immediately. Ada managed to climb down shakily, but blood dripped steadily from her injured hand. The rain soaked both of them completely as she reached the ground. "I'm fine," she insisted immediately. "You're bleeding." "It's small." Chima grabbed her wrist carefully. Blood covered her palm deeply. "This is not small." The villagers nearby shook their heads worriedly. "That cut needs treatment." Ada sighed impatiently. "Everybody relax. I've survived worse." But Chima's expression remained serious. "Come with me." "What?" "To the palace clinic." Her eyes widened instantly. "Absolutely not. You need stitches." "I need to avoid dying from embarrassment." Chima almost laughed despite the situation. "You're bleeding and still arguing. That's because your solution is ridiculous." But before she could protest further, thunder crashed loudly overhead. The rain became even heavier. Chima removed his outer shirt quickly and wrapped it carefully around her bleeding hand. Ada froze slightly. His touch was gentle, unexpectedly gentle. "You should stop moving it," he said quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain poured around them while villagers slowly disappeared toward their homes. Ada looked down at his expensive shirt, now stained with her blood. "You ruined your clothes." Chima shrugged. "I have more." That sentence alone proves we live different lives. He looked directly into her eyes. "I don't care about that." Something about the way he said it made her heartbeat shift strangely. Quickly, she looked away. The rain continued falling heavily. Finally, Chima sighed. "If you refuse the clinic, at least let me clean the wound properly." Ada hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. Her small house stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by banana trees and rough farmland. The roof looked old and partially damaged, while the walls carried visible cracks from years of weather. Yet, despite its condition, the space felt warm, real, unlike the giant palace filled with servants and expensive silence. Inside, Chima sat beside Ada while carefully cleaning her injured hand using warm water and herbs provided by an elderly village woman. Ada watched him quietly. "You really know how to do this?" "My mother insisted I learn basic first aid growing up." "That's surprisingly responsible for a billionaire prince." He smirked slightly. "I have hidden talents." Ada hissed softly as he disinfected the cut. "Sorry," he murmured gently. Silence settled again. Only the sound of rain hitting the roof filled the room. Finally, Ada spoke quietly. "You don't have to pretend around me." Chima looked up. "What do you mean?" "You don't need to act humble because I'm poor." The words were calm but honest. Chima stared at her for several seconds. Then he answered softly, "I'm not pretending." Ada searched his face carefully. Most men lied easily, especially powerful ones. But something about Chima felt painfully genuine, and that frightened her more than arrogance would have. "You shouldn't keep visiting me," she admitted quietly. "Why people are talking? They always talk. This is different." She looked down at her injured hand. You're royalty. And you're human. Ada laughed softly without humor. The palace definitely won't see it that way. Chima tied the bandage carefully before answering. Maybe I'm tired of living by palace expectations. Their eyes met again. This time, the silence between them changed completely. He was sitting very close now. Close enough for Ada to notice raindrops still clinging to his skin. Close enough for Chima to see the vulnerability hidden beneath her. Strength. For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared. No palace. No traditions. No royal expectations. Just two people breathing quietly inside a small house, while rain fell endlessly outside. Then, Chima slowly lifted his hand and touched her face gently. Ada froze completely. Nobody had touched her like that before. Not carefully, not tenderly. Her heartbeat became dangerously loud. Chima, I think about you constantly, he admitted softly. The honesty in his voice shook her. You shouldn't, but I do. We come from different worlds. I don't care. You should. Chima moved slightly closer. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people pretending to be something they're not. His voice lowered quietly. You're the first person in a long time who feels real to me. Ada looked away emotionally. That's dangerous. Maybe. You could lose everything. His eyes remained fixed on her. And maybe some things are worth more than crowns. The words pierced straight through her defenses. Before she could stop herself, Aida looked back at him. And in that moment Chima kissed her. Softly, carefully, like he was afraid she might disappear. Aida's breath caught instantly. For one brief second her walls cracked completely. The kiss deepened slowly while rain thundered against the roof above them. Every fear, every difference, every warning, disappeared. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them looked shaken by what had just happened. Aida stepped backward first. This is bad, she whispered. Chima stared at her quietly. Maybe she was right, because somewhere far away inside the royal palace of Yumiuk, a storm far more dangerous than rain was already beginning to form. By the next morning, Prince Chima already knew everything had changed. The kiss with Aida replayed endlessly in his mind. The way her breath caught softly, the fear in her eyes afterward. The honesty, the connection, nothing about it felt temporary, and that realization terrified him almost as much as it excited him. Inside the royal palace of Yumyak, however, trouble was already waiting. The moment Chima entered through the palace gates that morning, he noticed something unusual immediately. The servants looked nervous, very nervous. Some avoided eye contact completely. Others bowed too quickly before hurrying away. Even the palace guards stood strangely stiff near the entrance hall. Chima frowned slightly. What happened? One servant swallowed nervously before answering. His Majesty is looking for you. Of course he is. The prince exhaled slowly. Without another word, he walked deeper into the palace, while tension tightened around him with every step. By the time he reached the throne room, he already sensed the storm waiting inside. The massive doors stood open. Several royal chiefs sat quietly inside looking grim, while King Obiora stood near the throne with his hands clasped behind him. The atmosphere felt dangerously heavy. Chima stepped forward calmly. You wanted to see me. Nobody answered immediately. Then one elderly chief cleared his throat carefully. We have heard disturbing rumors. Chima remained expressionless. What rumors? The king finally turned slowly toward him. That you have been spending time with a village woman. Silence. So the rumors finally reached him fully. Chima looked around the room calmly, and one chief spoke sharply. And she is a palm wine tapper. Another elder scoffed openly. A common laborer. The prince's jaw tightened slightly. King Obiora's eyes remained fixed on him. Tell me the rumors are false. For a brief moment Chima considered lying. But he was tired of lies, tired of pretending, tired of shaping his life around other people's expectations. So instead he answered honestly, "They are true." The room exploded instantly. Several chiefs began speaking angrily over one another. This is disgraceful. A future king cannot behave this way. What will neighboring kingdoms think? King Obiara raised one hand sharply and silence returned immediately. But his face had darkened completely now. You are involved with this woman. Chima met his father's gaze directly. Yes. The king stared at him in disbelief. A palm wine tapper, yes. An orphan from the village, yes. The king laughed once. A short, dangerous laugh filled with anger instead of amusement. You insult this throne. Chima folded his arms calmly. No, I fell in love. Several chiefs looked horrified. The word itself sounded almost offensive inside the royal chamber. One elder stood angrily. Love, he snapped. Love does not govern kingdoms. Chima looked toward him. Neither does arrogance. The chiefs erupted again. King Obiara's voice thundered above them. Enough. Silence crashed across the throne room immediately. The king slowly stepped down from the throne platform until he stood directly before his son. You are embarrassing this family. Chima refused to back down. Because I care about someone poor. Because you are forgetting your place. The prince's expression hardened instantly. My place. You are the crown prince of Umyuk, and she is still a human being. The king pointed furiously toward the palace windows overlooking the kingdom. Thousands of people depend on this throne. And how does loving Ada destroy them? She is not royal. So bloodlines matter. Chima stared at him quietly for several seconds. Then he asked softly, does kindness matter? The question caught even the chiefs off guard. King Obiora frowned deeply. What? You keep talking about bloodlines, titles, wealth, and status. Chima's voice sharpened slightly. But when do we discuss character? She is beneath you. The words exploded through the room. Chima's eyes darkened immediately. No human being is beneath me. Several chiefs exchanged shocked looks. The prince had never openly challenged royal class systems this directly before. King Obiora looked almost insulted by the Obiora statement. You speak like a foolish child blinded by temporary feelings. Chima laughed bitterly. No, I speak like someone finally seeing clearly. The king's patience snapped further. What exactly does this woman offer you that royal women cannot? The answer came immediately. Peace. The room fell strangely quiet. Chima continued before anyone could interrupt. When I'm around Ada, nobody expects me to perform. Nobody treats me like a crown instead of a person. His voice lowered slightly. She sees me, not my title. One chief scoffed. She sees your wealth. Chima turned sharply toward him. No, that's exactly why this terrifies all of you. Silence. Because deep down part of them understood he was right. Ada had not pursued Chima, had not begged for palace attention, had not treated him like royalty, and somehow that made her even more dangerous in their eyes. King Obiora inhaled slowly, visibly trying to control his anger. You will end this relationship immediately. No. The answer came flat and immediate. The king stared at him. What did you say? I said no. You dare refuse your king? I refuse anyone trying to control my life. The chiefs looked horrified again. Never before had a crown prince openly defied the king so directly in front of the council. King Obiora's voice dropped lower now. More dangerous. You are choosing this woman over your kingdom, no. Chima corrected calmly. You are forcing me to choose. The king stepped closer until they stood face to face. If you continue seeing her, you risk losing everything. Chima did not move. Then maybe everything I stand to lose was never truly mine. The words struck hard. Even the king looked briefly shaken. But anger quickly replaced the moment. You think this is romance? King Obiora snapped. You think life is some American movie where princes abandon responsibility for love. No, Chima answered quietly. I think life is too short to spend it miserable. The king's eyes flashed with fury. Miserable, you married mother, because tradition demanded it. The entire room froze. Nobody dared speak after that sentence. Even the chiefs looked alarmed now. King Obiora's expression became unreadable. Be careful, he warned softly, but Chima continued anyway. You told me yourself that love came later. His voice grew firmer. What if it never truly came at all? Enough. The king's roar shook the room. Several servants outside nearly dropped what they were carrying. Chima finally raised his own voice too. No. I'm tired of pretending this system is perfect. The silence afterward felt explosive. The prince pointed toward the royal throne. That seat means nothing if the man sitting there is emotionally dead. One chief gasped quietly. Another muttered prayers beneath his breath. King Obi-Ora looked ready to explode completely. You insult generations of kings. No, I'm questioning generations of fear. The king clenched his fists tightly. You know nothing about sacrifice, and you know nothing about freedom. The words crashed between them violently. For several painful seconds, father and son simply stared at each other, neither willing to bend, neither willing to surrender. Then finally King Obi-Ora spoke again, coldly. If you continue this madness, you will never become king. Chima answered without hesitation. Then I will give up the throne. Complete silence. Absolute silence. Even breathing seemed to stop inside the throne room. The chiefs stared at him in horror. One elderly man nearly stumbled backward into his chair. King Obi-Ora himself looked genuinely shocked. You would not abandon your birthright for a village girl. Chima's voice softened slightly now. She is not just some village girl. She taps palm wine for a living. And she works harder than half the rich men sitting in this palace. The insult hit the chiefs directly. Several looked furious, but Chima no longer cared. For the first time in his life, he felt completely honest. No performance, no obedience, just truth. King Obi-Ora slowly shook his head. This woman has poisoned your mind. No, Chima replied quietly. She opened my eyes. The king looked almost wounded by that answer. Not just angry, hurt, because beneath all the arguments he genuinely believed he was protecting both the kingdom and his son. But now his son stood before him willing to throw away centuries of legacy. And for the first time King Abiora realized the situation was far more serious than youthful rebellion. This was love, real love, dangerous love. Meanwhile, far away from the palace, Ada sat alone outside her small house beneath a large mango tree. She had not seen Chima since the kiss, and honestly she was relieved because the moment their lips touched, every wall she built around herself started collapsing. That terrified her. Villagers passing nearby kept staring curiously at her now. Rumors spread quickly in small communities too quickly. One elderly woman eventually approached carefully. Ada, yes, Mama Grace. The woman sat beside her slowly. You must be careful. Ada looked away quietly. I know. Palace people are not ordinary people. I know. The old woman sighed sadly. Power changes situations. Ada's chest tightened slightly because deep down she already understood the danger. No matter how kind Chima seemed, he was still a prince, and she was still just Ada, a poor orphan who climbed trees to survive. Their worlds were too different, too impossible. Yet, despite every warning in her mind, she still missed him already. Back inside the palace, the argument finally ended only when Queen Ifunanya entered the throne room unexpectedly. The moment she saw the tension, her expression tightened. What happened? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one chief muttered bitterly, "Your son has lost his senses." The queen looked toward Chima, then toward her husband, and somehow she understood immediately. King Abiora pointed furiously toward the door. "Leave this room." Akima remained standing still. The king's voice thundered again. "I said leave." For a brief moment it looked like Achima might argue again. Instead, he exhaled slowly and turned away. As he walked toward the doors, one chief muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A prince willing to abandon the throne for a common woman is unfit to rule." Achima stopped walking then, slowly looked back. "You know what truly makes someone unfit to rule?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. The prince's eyes moved across the entire council, thinking wealth and titles make certain lives more valuable than others. Then he walked out, leaving complete silence behind him. And deep within the palace walls of Umyuk, war had officially begun. After the explosive confrontation inside the palace throne room, the entire kingdom of Umyuk became restless. Rumors spread faster than wildfire across Enugu. The prince wants to marry a palm wine tapper. He fought the king because of her. He said he would abandon the throne. Every market, roadside shop, and village gathering buzzed with gossip. Some people admired Achima's courage. Others called him foolish. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. The situation was becoming dangerous. And no one felt that danger more deeply than Ada. That morning she sat quietly outside her small house, staring at the dusty road ahead while barely touching her breakfast. Usually Ada woke before sunrise, full of energy. Usually she climbed trees before most villagers even left their beds. Usually she laughed loudly and argued with everybody. But today she looked distant, heavy, worried. Her friend Ngozi noticed immediately. The older woman walked over carrying a basket of vegetables and frowned. "You haven't gone to work." Ada forced a shrug. "I'll go later." Ngozi sat beside her slowly. "That prince matter is becoming serious," Ada sighed deeply. "I told him this would happen." Ngozi lowered her voice carefully. "The entire village is talking." Ada looked down at her rough hands silently. For years, those hands were the only thing she depended on. Not family, not wealth, not protection, just work. Now suddenly her name was spreading through royal circles because a prince fell in love with her, felt unreal and terrifying. "I don't belong in that world," Ada whispered quietly. Ngozi studied her carefully. "But you like him." Ada closed her eyes briefly. That was the problem. She liked him far more than she should, maybe even loved him already. And that thought alone scared her because love had never protected people like her before. Ngozi sighed softly. "Rich people's problems are dangerous." Ada laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know?" The older woman touched her shoulder gently. "Then be wise." Those words stayed inside Ada's mind long after Ngozi left. Be wise. That was exactly what her heart was refusing to do. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Prince Chima was equally miserable. Since the confrontation with his father, the atmosphere around him had become unbearable. Royal chiefs avoided hiding their disapproval now. Servants whispered openly whenever he passed. Even some guards looked at him differently, like he had betrayed the kingdom somehow. Worst of all, King Obiora refused to speak to him completely. At breakfast, the king acted as though Chima did not exist. At dinner, silence stretched painfully between them. Only Queen Ifeoknanya tried maintaining peace. One evening she entered Chima's room quietly and found him sitting alone near the balcony. Again, "You haven't slept properly," she observed gently. Chima rubbed his face tiredly. "Neither has father." The queen sighed. "You two are destroying each other. He thinks I'm destroying the kingdom, and you think he's destroying your happiness." The prince remained silent. Queen Ifeoknanya sat beside him. "Tell me honestly," she said softly. "Do you truly love this girl?" Chima answered without hesitation. "Yes." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Slightly. No doubt. No confusion. Just truth. The queen studied her son carefully. "When did this become serious?" Chima stared toward the dark palace gardens below. "I don't know exactly." He smiled faintly. "Somewhere between her insulting me daily and nearly killing herself climbing trees." The queen laughed softly despite herself. "She sounds fearless." "She is. And stubborn. Very." Queen Ifeok. Nanya shook her head knowingly. "No wonder you fell in love." Chima finally smiled properly, but the smile faded quickly. "She's scared now." The queen's expression softened, because she understands reality. The prince looked down quietly. "I don't want her hurt because of me." "Then you must decide how far you're willing to go for this love." That question haunted him long after she left. How far was he willing to go? The answer came faster than expected. The next afternoon Chima returned to Ada's village despite palace tension reaching dangerous levels. But when he arrived near the palm groves, something immediately felt wrong. Ada wasn't there. The usual laughter and activities surrounding her work area were gone. Instead, several villagers exchanged awkward looks when they saw him approaching. One old man finally spoke carefully. "She hasn't worked today." Chima frowned. "Why?" The villagers hesitated. Then one woman sighed. "She's afraid." The prince's chest tightened instantly. Without another word, he headed directly toward Ada's house. When he arrived, he found her sitting outside beneath the mango tree again, staring silently at the ground. The moment she saw him, her expression changed. Not happiness. Fear. Real fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately. Chima stopped walking. "That's your greeting? I'm serious." He moved closer anyway. "What happened?" Ada stood quickly. "What happened?" she repeated quietly. "The whole kingdom is talking about us. And, and you fought your father because of me." "I fought him because he tried controlling my life." Ada shook her head emotionally. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." She looked away. "This is not a game for people like me." The words hurt more than Chima expected. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll survive this situation, no matter what happens." Chima frowned deeply. "And you think I'll let anything happen to you?" Ada laughed softly, without humor. "You can't protect me from the entire kingdom." The prince stepped closer. "I can try." "That's exactly the problem." Her voice cracked slightly now. "You're risking everything for somebody who climbs trees for a living. You are not just somebody. You're a Prince Chima, and you're Ada." "No," she snapped emotionally. "You keep saying that like it erases reality." Silence crashed between them. For several seconds only the distant sound of birds filled the air. Then Ada spoke again, quieter this time. "You don't understand how this world works for poor people." Chima stared at her silently. "If rich people make mistakes," she continued painfully, "society forgives them eventually. But poor people," she shook her head slowly, "we get crushed." The truth in her words hit hard, because deep down he knew she was right. Ada looked at him with tears threatening her eyes now. "If this goes badly, you'll still be Prince Chima Okafor." Her voice trembled slightly. "But I'll become the foolish village girl who thought a prince could love her. The words pierced straight through him. Immediately Chima stepped closer and gently held her shoulders. Listen to me carefully. Ada avoided his eyes. No. Yes. Finally, she looked at him again. You are not foolish for being loved. The intensity in his voice shook her. You don't know what people are saying about me. I don't care. But I care. Tears finally escaped her eyes now. I've spent my entire life surviving quietly. Now everybody looks at me like I committed some crime because a prince noticed me. Chima's chest tightened painfully. This was exactly what he feared. The kingdom wasn't attacking him first. It was attacking her. I don't want to ruin your future, Ada whispered. The prince gently wiped one tear from her face. You are my future. Ada closed her eyes briefly. No, she whispered shakily. Don't say things like that. Why? Because I might start believing them. The honesty in her voice nearly broke him. For several moments neither spoke. Then Ada slowly stepped away from him. You should stop seeing me. The words felt like physical pain. Chima stared at her in disbelief. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. No, I'm serious. The prince shook his head firmly. You're scared. Of course I'm scared. Her voice rose emotionally again. Do you know what it feels like watching powerful people discuss your life like you're some embarrassing mistake? Chima remained silent. Ada laughed bitterly through tears. The royal council probably talks about me like I'm dirt. They don't know you. They don't want to know me. That answer hurt, because it was true. Ada looked toward the distant hills quietly. I was fine before you came. You call this life fine. At least it was simple. Chima stepped closer again. And lonely. Ada froze slightly, because once again he was right. For years, Ada convinced herself she didn't need anybody, didn't need love, didn't need protection, didn't need softness. Then Chima appeared and ruined all those lies simply by caring about her genuinely. That terrified her more than royal gossip ever could. You make me weak, she admitted quietly. The prince's expression softened immediately. No, he said gently. You've just been strong for too long alone. The words shattered something inside her. Tears fell freely now. Without hesitation, Chima pulled her into his arms. At first, Ada resisted slightly. Then slowly she melted against him. For the first time in years, somebody held her like she mattered. Not because of beauty, not because of status, not because of obligation, just because he wanted to. I don't know how to do this, she whispered against his chest. Neither do I. You could lose the throne. I don't care. You say that now. I mean it. Ada pulled back enough to look at him properly. His face carried no hesitation, no fear, only certainty. That certainty scared her almost as much as it comforted her. What if your father never accepts me? She asked softly. Chima answered immediately. Then he doesn't. You say impossible things too easily. No, he touched her face gently. I just know what matters now. Ada looked at him silently, then finally whispered the truth she had been fighting for days. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between them softly, dangerously, beautifully. Chima smiled slowly. I know. Ada rolled her eyes through tears. That was arrogant. You kissed me back, he reminded her. She tried not to smile, failed, and for one brief moment, the fear surrounding them disappeared completely. But far away inside the palace of Umiak, King Obiora sat alone in the throne room listening to more reports about his son and the palm wine tapper. With every new rumor, his anger grew darker, and the battle for Chima's future was only becoming more dangerous. The palace of Umiok had not known peace for weeks. Every corridor carried tension. Every royal Meeting ended in arguments. Every servant whispered nervously whenever Prince Chima's name was mentioned. Inside the throne room, King Obiora sat with the royal council almost every evening discussing the same problem repeatedly. Ada, the palm wine tapper, the orphan, the village girl, who somehow captured the future king's heart. This situation must end immediately. One chief complained angrily. It is becoming embarrassing. Another added, people across Enugu are gossiping openly now. King Obiara remained silent while listening, but his face grew darker with every conversation. Meanwhile, Chima had become impossible to control. The more pressure the palace placed on him, the more stubborn he became. He openly ignored meetings with royal advisors. He rejected every attempt to reconcile with Princess Amara, and worst of all, he continued seeing Ada every single day. The king finally slammed his staff against the floor angrily. Boom! The chiefs immediately fell silent. My son is behaving like a man bewitched. King Obiara snapped. One elder cleared his throat carefully. With respect, your majesty, perhaps harsher measures are necessary. The king frowned. What do you mean ban him from leaving the palace grounds? Another chief nodded quickly. Yes, distance may weaken the attachment. King Obiara looked thoughtful for several seconds, then slowly shook his head. No. The chiefs looked surprised. If I imprison him, the king said quietly, I may lose him completely. That answer silenced the room because beneath all the anger everyone could now see the truth clearly. This was no longer simple rebellion. Prince Chima truly loved Ada, and that made the situation far more dangerous. Later that night, Queen Ifananya entered the royal chamber quietly and found her husband sitting alone near the fireplace. He looked exhausted, older somehow. The queen walked over gently. You haven't slept. King Obiara sighed deeply. How can when the future of this kingdom is collapsing before my eyes? Queen Iphionania sat beside him calmly. The kingdom is not collapsing. Our son is willing to abandon the throne because he found someone he loves. The king rubbed his forehead tiredly. He is throwing away generations of royal legacy for a village girl. The queen looked at him carefully. Is she a bad person? King Obiara frowned. That is not the issue. It should be. She is not royal. Queen Iphionania sighed softly. There was a time powerful families said the same thing about me. The king looked at her sharply. This is different. No, she replied gently. It is not. Silence settled between them. Years ago, before becoming queen, Iphionania came from a respected but far less powerful family than the king's. Several chiefs strongly opposed their marriage. Some believed she lacked the noble blood required to become queen. Others claimed she was too gentle to survive palace politics. But King Obiara fought for her fiercely. The same man now refusing his son's happiness had once challenged royal expectations himself. You loved me enough to ignore tradition. The queen reminded him softly. The king looked away. I still respected the dignity of the throne. And Chima respects people's humanity. That answer lingered heavily. The queen touched his hand gently. Our son is not weak because he loves deeply. King Obiara remained silent. But if you force him to choose between the throne and happiness, her voice softened sadly, you may force him away forever. The king stared into the fire quietly. And for the first time, since the conflict began, doubt entered his heart. Meanwhile, far from the palace, Ada sat outside small house repairing one of her climbing ropes beneath the evening sky. Her mind remained restless. The deeper her feelings for Chima grew, the more afraid she became. Nothing about their relationship felt safe anymore. Villagers stared constantly now whenever they appeared together. Women whispered behind her back. Men watched curiously whenever Chima visited. Even customers buying palm wine treated her differently. Not as Ada anymore, but as the prince's woman, and somehow that frightened her, because she did not want to become somebody's scandal. She simply wanted peace. As she tied another knot into the rope, footsteps approached slowly. Ada looked up and nearly dropped the rope entirely. Standing before her was Queen Ifananya herself, dressed simply but elegantly, accompanied by only one elderly female attendant. Ada immediately stood in shock. "Why, Your Majesty?" The queen smiled gently. "Relax, child." Ada's heart pounded wildly. What was the queen doing here? Had the palace come to end everything? Quickly, Ada bowed respectfully. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't know you were coming." The queen lightly touched her arm. "There is no need for fear." But Ada was absolutely terrified. No queen had ever visited this village before, especially not her tiny house. "May I sit?" Queenie Funanya asked softly. Ada blinked repeatedly. "Oh, of course." Hurriedly, she cleaned the wooden bench outside while trying to calm herself. The queen sat gracefully beneath the mango tree while observing the small house quietly. Simple, worn, but clean and cared for. "You live alone?" the queen asked gently. Ada nodded. "Yes. And you built this life yourself?" Another nod. The queen looked genuinely impressed. "That requires strength." Ada lowered her eyes awkwardly. For several moments silence settled between them. Then finally Queen Ifunanaya spoke carefully. "You love my son." Ada froze completely. The directness of the question shocked her. Slowly she looked down at her hands. "Yes." The honesty came out before fear could stop it. The queen nodded quietly. "And he loves you too." Ada swallowed painfully. "That's the problem." Queen Ifunanaya studied her face carefully. "You're afraid." Ada laughed softly without humor. "Shouldn't I be the queen?" Could not argue with that. Instead, she asked softly, "Tell me honestly, have you ever tried using Chima for his wealth or position?" Ada looked genuinely offended. "No, I know." The queen's answer surprised her. "I watched my son carefully after he returned from America." Queen Ifunanaya continued. "For years he smiled without happiness. Even during celebrations he looked emotionally distant." Ada listened silently. But lately the queen smiled faintly. "He laughs again." Something emotional tightened in Ada's chest. The queen sighed softly. "You brought light back into him." Tears nearly entered Ada's eyes instantly. Nobody had ever spoken about her that way before. Not as valuable, not as important. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Ada whispered. "I believe you." Ada looked toward the distant village road. "I tried warning him. And did he listen?" A tiny smile appeared despite herself. "No." The queen laughed softly. "That stubbornness came from his father." The warmth in her voice slowly eased Ada's fear. For the first time since the royal drama began, she felt seen instead of judged. Then the queen's expression softened further. "I need you to understand something important." Ada looked at her carefully. "My husband is not an evil man." The statement surprised her slightly. "He fears losing the kingdom's stability. He fears breaking traditions that existed for generations." The queen sighed quietly. "And sometimes fear makes people crueler than they intend." Ada remained silent. Queen Euphunania looked directly into her eyes. "But deep inside, King Obiora loves his son more than anything." A long silence followed. Then Ada asked quietly, "Do you think he'll ever accept me?" The queen hesitated. Honesty mattered here. "I don't know yet." Ada nodded sadly. "That's fair." But the queen added gently, "I believe hearts can change. Meanwhile, back inside the palace, Chima searched everywhere for his mother. Finally, one servant spoke nervously. Her Majesty left the palace earlier. Left, yes, Your Highness. With guards. Only one attendant. Chima frowned deeply. His mother rarely traveled quietly without explanation. Something felt unusual. Several hours later, Queen Ifunania finally returned to the palace. The moment she entered, Chima approached immediately. "Where did you go?" The queen smiled knowingly. "You sound worried." "Mother, I visited Ada." Chima froze completely. "You what?" The queen laughed softly at his expression. "Relax. I did not poison her." "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's frightened." His face darkened immediately. "I know, but she loves you deeply." The words hit him harder than expected. Chima looked away briefly, then quietly asked, "Did she really say that?" The queen smiled. "You look very happy for a prince pretending to be serious." He tried hiding the smile forming anyway. Failed. Queen Ifunanya touched his arm gently. "She is a good woman, Chima." Emotion crossed his face instantly. "Thank you." The queen's expression grew thoughtful. "But loving each other will not magically erase reality." His smile faded slightly. "I know. You are asking her to stand against centuries of tradition. I never wanted her hurt. I know that too." The queen sighed softly. "So now you must decide whether your love is strong enough to survive what comes next." Before Chima could answer, another voice suddenly, both turned instantly. King Obiora stood at the entrance of the corridor, his face unreadable but his eyes dark. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Queen Ifunanya remained calm. "My husband." But the king cut her off. "You went to see the girl." "Yes." King Obiora looked deeply disappointed. "You undermine this family." "No." The queen replied quietly, "I'm trying to save it." Silence followed. Then the king turned toward Chima. "The council meets tomorrow morning." Chima's jaw tightened. "About what?" "Your future." Without another word, King Obiora walked away, leaving heavy silence behind him. Chima looked toward his mother slowly. Something about his father's tone felt different, more serious, more final. And deep inside the palace walls of Yumioka, a decision was approaching that could either destroy the royal family forever or finally change it. The next morning, the royal palace of Yumioka felt colder than ever. Dark clouds gathered above Enugu while tension spread through the palace halls like smoke before a fire. Servants moved carefully, speaking in hushed whispers. Everybody knew something important was about to happen. The royal council had been summoned urgently, and whenever all the chiefs gathered together at once, it usually meant history was about to change. Prince Chima barely slept the previous night. He stood alone on his balcony before sunrise, staring silently at the kingdom below while countless thoughts battled inside his head. He knew what today's meeting meant. The council was finally forcing a decision. Either he abandoned Ada or risked losing the throne forever. Yet strangely, despite everything, his heart remained calm because for the first time in his life he knew exactly what mattered to him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Queen Ifunanya entered quietly. The moment she saw her son's face, her expression softened with concern. "You didn't sleep." Chima smiled faintly. "Neither did you." The queen walked closer and adjusted his collar gently, like she used to when he was a child. "No matter what happens today," she said softly, "I am proud of you." Emotion flickered across his face instantly. "Even if I lose the throne," the queen smiled sadly, "a crown means nothing if it destroys the man wearing it." For several seconds, Chima simply looked at his mother quietly. Then he pulled her into a brief hug. "Thank you." The queen held him tightly. "You remind me so much of your father when he was young." Chima laughed softly. He'd probably hate hearing that. The queen smiled knowingly. Perhaps because it's true. Meanwhile, inside another section of the palace, King Obiora prepared for the council meeting in silence. Several royal attendants dressed him carefully in magnificent traditional robes, embroidered with gold symbols of the kingdom. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding him, the king's face looked heavy with exhaustion. One elderly advisor finally spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, are you certain about today?" King Obiora stared at his reflection for several seconds before answering. "No." The advisor looked surprised. The king rarely admitted uncertainty. King Obiora exhaled deeply. "I spent my entire life believing tradition must always come first." And now the king's eyes darkened thoughtfully. "Now I wonder if fear has been disguising itself as wisdom." The advisor remained silent because those words alone revealed how deeply the situation had affected the king. Inside the Grand Council chamber, the chiefs slowly gathered one after another. Richly dressed elders filled the room while guards stood firmly near the entrances. The atmosphere felt tense immediately. Some chiefs looked angry, others looked worried. A few simply looked tired of the endless conflict dividing the palace. Finally, the large doors opened again. Prince Chima entered calmly. The room instantly fell silent. Many elders stared at him disapprovingly. Others looked almost pitying. But Chima walked confidently toward the center of the chamber anyway. Moments later, King Obiora entered. Every person immediately stood and bowed. The king slowly took his seat upon the throne before raising one hand. "You may sit." The meeting began. One elderly chief stood first. "Your Majesty, we cannot continue delaying this matter." Several others nodded immediately. "The kingdom requires stability. The prince approaches his 30th birthday. Tradition must be respected." King Obiora remained silent while listening. Then another chief spoke sharply. "The relationship between the crown prince and that village woman has become public disgrace." Chima's jaw tightened slightly. "She has a name." The chief looked irritated. "That is not important. It is to me." The room grew tense again immediately. One elder sighed heavily. "Prince Chima, nobody doubts your intelligence, but you are allowing emotions to blind you." Chima looked directly at him. "No, emotions are finally forcing me to see clearly." Murmurs spread quietly across the chamber. Another chief stood angrily. "You would abandon royal duty for a palm wine tapper. I would choose a good woman over empty tradition." The words hit hard. Several chiefs muttered angrily beneath their breath. One elderly man pointed his walking staff toward Chima. "That woman cannot become queen." Why? Chima challenged immediately. "Because she lacks royal blood." "And what exactly does royal blood guarantee?" Chima asked sharply. "Kindness, wisdom, compassion." The chief opened his mouth, but could not answer immediately. Chima continued before anyone interrupted. "You all supported Princess Amara because she came from wealth and status. Yet none of you cared how she treated people." The room became uncomfortably quiet. Several chiefs looked away slightly because deep down they remembered the garden incident too. "She assaulted a servant." Chima continued firmly, "But somehow Ada is the unworthy one because she works for a living." One chief scoffed loudly. "A queen should not climb trees." Chima stared directly at him. "A queen should care about her people." Silence followed. The prince stepped slowly toward the center of the room. "You all speak about tradition constantly." His voice deepened slightly, but traditions were created to protect kingdoms, not destroy people's happiness. King Abiora watched his son carefully without speaking. Chima continued, "My entire life everyone decided who I should become, what I should study, how I should behave, who I should marry." His voice sharpened emotionally, "And nobody ever asked whether I would actually be happy." One elder frowned. Happiness is temporary. Duty lasts forever. Chima looked toward him calmly. A miserable ruler eventually creates a miserable kingdom. That answer silenced several people immediately, because despite their resistance, the prince was speaking truths many secretly understood. One chief finally turned toward the king. "Your Majesty, this conversation changes." "Nothing. The law is clear." The room grew still again. "Yes, the law, the ancient tradition requiring the crown prince to marry before turning 30, the very rule, now threatening Chima's future." The chief continued firmly. "If the prince refuses an appropriate royal marriage, the throne must pass to the next eligible heir." Heavy silence settled over the chamber. Everyone waited for King Obiora to speak. But before the king could answer, Chima stepped forward again, then let it pass. Shock exploded across the room instantly. Several chiefs began speaking at once. "You cannot be serious. This is madness. Think carefully before speaking." Chima remained calm, completely calm. He looked directly at his father. "I meant what I said before." His voice remained steady. "If keeping the throne requires abandoning the woman I love, then I will walk away from it." The entire chamber fell silent again. Even the air itself seemed frozen. King Obiara stared at his son carefully. "You would surrender everything?" Chima answered without hesitation. "Yes." The certainty in his voice shook the room deeply. Not rebellion, not youthful stubbornness. Certainty. Real love stood before them now. And suddenly the situation no longer felt simple. For several long moments King Obiara said nothing. Then slowly the king stood. Every chief immediately became silent. King Obiara stepped down from the throne platform and walked toward his son carefully. The room watched breathlessly. "You truly love this woman," the king said quietly. Chima met his gaze directly. "With my entire heart." The king studied him for several seconds, then finally asked the question nobody expected. "And she loves you the same way?" Chima's expression softened slightly. "Yes." Something changed in King Obiara's eyes then. Not anger, not pride, memory. Slowly, the king looked around the chamber at the chiefs surrounding him. For weeks he began carefully. "I believed this situation threatened the kingdom." Several chiefs nodded immediately. "But last night," the king continued, "I remembered something important." The chamber remained silent. King Obiora's voice softened slightly. "When I was younger, many people opposed my marriage too." Several older chiefs shifted uncomfortably. The king looked toward Queen Ifeanya, who stood quietly near the entrance. "They said she was too gentle for palace life, too ordinary for the throne." A faint smile touched his face. "But she became the greatest queen this kingdom has ever known." Emotion filled the queen's eyes instantly. The chiefs looked increasingly uneasy. King Obiora slowly faced them again. "We claim tradition exists to protect this kingdom." His voice deepened firmly. "But what kind of kingdom destroys good people simply because they were born poor?" No one answered. The king continued walking slowly across the chamber. "I investigated this girl myself." Chima blinked in surprise. The chiefs looked shocked. King Obiora nodded thoughtfully. "She works harder than most men. She cares for her community. She survived hardship without bitterness." He paused briefly, and despite all the insults directed toward her, she never once disrespected this palace. Publicly. Silence deepened, because again everything the king said was true. One chief tried speaking carefully. "Your Majesty, even if the girl has good character tradition," King Obiora raised one hand sharply. "Traditions must serve humanity." His voice thundered now. "Not imprison it." The room froze completely. For the first time, the chiefs realized something impossible was happening. The king was changing his position. King Obiora finally turned fully toward Chima. My son Chima stood motionless. The king's expression softened in a way rarely seen publicly. You were willing to surrender power for love. He nodded slowly. That tells me you value people more than status. Emotion tightened Chima's chest. King Obiara smiled faintly. And perhaps that is exactly the kind of man fit to become king. Several chiefs gasped quietly. The king raised his voice firmly across the chamber. I approve the union. Silence. Absolute. Stunned silence. For one full moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then suddenly, Queen Ifananya smiled through tears. Chima himself looked almost unable to process what he heard. You, he whispered. King Obiara sighed heavily. Do not make me repeat myself before I change my mind. Laughter unexpectedly broke through parts of the chamber. Even a few chiefs smiled reluctantly. The tension that nearly destroyed the royal family finally began cracking apart. Chima stepped closer slowly. Father, King Obiara looked directly at him. You chose love over power, the king said quietly. Few men are brave enough to do that. Emotion filled Chima's eyes instantly. For the first time in weeks, father and son truly saw each other again. Not as king and prince, but simply as family. And somewhere, far away in her small village house, Ada still had no idea her entire life was about to change forever. The news spread across Enugu faster than wildfire. The crown prince was marrying the palm wine tapper. Every marketplace buzzed with excitement. Every roadside shop became filled with arguments and gossip. Some people still couldn't believe it. The king actually agreed Ada is becoming a princess. From climbing palm trees to entering the palace, others smiled proudly. Maybe good people finally win sometimes. Inside Ada's village, however, the reaction felt even more emotional. Women gathered outside her small house from early morning talking loudly while trying to process the impossible news. Ngozi nearly screamed when palace guards arrived carrying official wedding gifts from the royal family. Large boxes filled with expensive fabrics, jewelry, shoes, and perfumes were carefully unloaded, while villagers stared in open shock. Ada. Ngozi grabbed her arm dramatically. You're truly marrying the prince. Ada still looked overwhelmed herself. Everything had happened so quickly after King Obiora's approval. One moment she was terrified of losing Chima forever. The next moment royal wedding preparations consumed the entire kingdom. It still felt unreal. As palace attendants entered her small house carrying more gifts, Ada quietly stepped outside beneath the mango tree to breathe. Her heart pounded. Heavily. Could a life truly change this much? Just months ago, she climbed trees daily worrying about survival. Now royal designers were measuring her for wedding gowns. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Ada looked up. Prince Chima. The moment their eyes met, she smiled automatically. And Chima immediately forgot every stressful royal meeting waiting for him back at the palace. You disappeared, Ada teased softly. I was dragged into 6 different wedding discussions. She laughed. Poor prince, you sound unsympathetic. Very. Chima stepped closer and gently touched her face. Even now, after everything, he still looked at her like she was something precious. That look alone made Ada's heart weak. You okay? He asked quietly. Ada hesitated, then sighed softly. I'm trying to believe this is real. It's real. You say that so confidently. Because I fought. Too hard for you to disappear now. Emotion flickered across her face instantly. Sometimes she still could not understand why somebody like Chima loved her this deeply. Not because she lacked worth, but because life had never given her softness before him. Chima noticed the emotion in her eyes immediately. What Ada smiled faintly. You really would have abandoned the throne for me. Yes, the answer came instantly. No hesitation, no regret. Ada looked away emotionally. That's still crazy. Chima grinned slightly. You climbed palm trees taller than buildings. We both have problems. She laughed softly and lightly pushed his chest. You compare terrible things beautifully. Before he could reply, Ngozi suddenly rushed outside excitedly. Ada, the palace women are arguing because you refused old shoes. Chima burst into laughter instantly. Ada groaned dramatically. They're uncomfortable. You're becoming difficult already, Chima teased. I was already difficult before royalty arrived. True. Together they walked back inside while villagers watched them with amazement. The prince looked completely relaxed around her. Not formal, not distant, not royal, just happy. And somehow that made people love them even more. Meanwhile, inside the palace, preparations for the royal wedding became enormous. Decorators covered the palace halls with flowers and gold fabrics, while musicians rehearsed endlessly for the upcoming celebrations. Chefs prepared menus large enough to feed thousands. Even the royal chiefs who once opposed Ada now reluctantly participated in wedding planning, though not all of them looked pleased. One elderly chief muttered quietly during a meeting, I still never imagined a palm wine tapper would become future queen. Queen, Ifunanya overheard immediately. And yet here we are. The chief quickly lowered his eyes respectfully. The queen smiled faintly. Perhaps the ancestors enjoy surprising proud people. Elsewhere in the palace, Princess Amara prepared to leave Yumyak with her family. The failed arrangement humiliated her deeply. Inside her luxurious guest room, her mother sighed heavily, while servants packed expensive luggage. You should let this go. Amara crossed her arms, bitterly. He chose a village girl over me, because she made him happy. The princess scoffed loudly. And I didn't. Her mother looked at her carefully. You never tried. The words hit harder than expected. For the first time, Amara remembered the servant she kicked in the garden weeks ago, then remembered Chima's expression afterward. Disappointment, not anger alone. Disappointment. Slowly, the princess looked away. Maybe for the first time in years, somebody refused to tolerate her cruelty simply because she was wealthy, and strangely that rejection humbled her more than insults ever could. The day before the wedding, Ada finally entered the royal palace officially for traditional bridal preparations. The moment she stepped inside wearing a simple wrapper and headscarf, servants paused to stare. Some still looked shocked. Others smiled warmly, but Ada herself felt deeply nervous. This place is too shiny, she whispered to Chima. He laughed softly. You used to insult me for being rich. I still do. Queen Ifiok approached elegantly and immediately embraced Ada warmly. You look terrified. I feel terrified. The queen smiled knowingly. That means you understand the importance of this moment. Palace women soon surrounded Ada excitedly, leading her away for bridal preparations. For hours they styled her hair, applied makeup, and dressed her in magnificent traditional fabrics embroidered with coral beads and gold details. At first Ada resisted everything. This necklace is too heavy. You're walking too fast around me. How do rich people survive wearing all this? The women laughed endlessly, but slowly Ada began transforming before their eyes. Not into somebody artificial, not into a fake royal woman, but into the powerful version of herself she never allowed herself to imagine. When she finally stood before the large palace mirror, completely dressed, silence filled the room. Even Ada herself froze. The woman staring back looked breathtaking, strong, elegant, royal. Tears filled her eyes unexpectedly. Queen Ifiok stepped beside her gently. What's wrong? Ada swallowed emotionally. All my life people looked at me like survival was the greatest thing I deserved. The queen touched her shoulder softly, and now Ada stared at her reflection quietly. Now I feel seen. The queen's eyes softened instantly. You were always worthy, Ada. The world simply failed to notice. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Chima prepared with his friends while traditional drummers performed outside. Tab adjusted the prince's richly embroidered outfit dramatically. You know he teased for somebody who almost abandoned the throne. You look suspiciously royal today. Chima laughed. My mother threatened me. Fair. Another friend grinned. You're smiling too much. I'm getting married to a woman who used to insult you daily. Chima smiled proudly. Exactly. The wedding morning arrived with explosive celebration across Enugu. Crowds filled the palace grounds long before sunrise, while traditional dancers performed through the streets. Music echoed everywhere. Drums, flutes singing. The entire kingdom celebrated. When Prince Chima finally entered the royal courtyard wearing magnificent, traditional attire, the crowd erupted loudly. Women screamed excitedly, while chiefs nodded proudly. But the loudest reaction came when Ada appeared. The entire palace courtyard fell silent for one breathtaking moment. Then came gasps. Ada walked gracefully beside Queen Ifananya wearing a stunning royal gown decorated with coral beads, gold embroidery, and elegant traditional jewelry. Her natural beauty seemed almost unreal beneath the morning sunlight. Even the chiefs who once rejected her looked speechless now. She looks like a queen already, one elder admitted quietly. But Chima barely noticed anyone else. Seven spare sta. The moment he saw Ada, everything disappeared. The crowd, the music, the palace. All he could see was her. Ada reached him slowly, trying not to look nervous. You're staring again, she whispered softly. You're impossible to stop looking at. She tried hiding her smile. Failed completely. The traditional marriage ceremony began beneath enormous decorated canopies, while villagers and royal guests watched proudly. Ancient blessings were spoken. Palm wine was shared ceremonially. Families exchanged gifts, according to Igbo tradition. Then finally King Obiora stood before the entire kingdom. The palace courtyard became silent immediately. The king looked toward Ada carefully. For a moment emotion crossed his face unexpectedly. Then he spoke, clearly for everyone to hear. When this young woman first entered our lives, many of us judged her by status instead of character. Several chiefs shifted awkwardly. King Obiora continued. But true leadership requires wisdom enough to recognize goodness no matter where it comes from. Ada looked stunned. The king turned fully toward her. You have shown courage, dignity, and humility even under enormous pressure. His voice softened slightly. And for loving my son, honestly, you already have my respect. Tears instantly filled Ada's eyes. Nobody expected such public acceptance from the king himself. Even Chima looked emotional. Then King Obiora placed his hand over both their joined hands. May your marriage strengthen not only this family, but this kingdom itself. Cheers exploded across the palace immediately. Drums thundered loudly while dancers flooded the courtyard. Prince Chima finally pulled Ada gently closer as celebration erupted around them. You're officially trapped with me now, he teased softly. Ada laughed through happy tears. You're still annoying. Good. I was worried marriage might fix your personality. She rolled her eyes affectionately, then quietly whispered something that nearly broke his heart completely. Thank you for choosing me. Chima touched her face gently. There was never another choice. As music filled the skies above Enugu, Billionaire Prince and the palm wine tapper finally became husband and wife. The wedding celebrations lasted for 7 unforgettable days across Enugu. Music echoed through the streets from morning until midnight, while villagers danced endlessly beneath colorful lights and decorated canopies. Everywhere people went, they talked about the royal couple, the billionaire prince who chose love over the throne, and the palm wine tapper who became future queen. Even neighboring kingdoms sent gifts and representatives to witness the historic marriage. For many people, the wedding symbolized something much bigger than romance. Hope, the possibility that class and status did not completely control destiny. Inside the palace, however, the biggest adjustment belonged to Ada herself. The first few weeks after the wedding felt overwhelming. Every morning servants bowed when she entered rooms. Royal advisors constantly asked for her opinions during meetings. Palace women insisted on dressing her in luxurious fabrics and jewelry heavy enough to exhaust her. And worst of all, she still kept forgetting people expected her to behave like royalty. One morning, Ada wandered into the palace kitchen barefoot, searching for food because she woke up hungry before breakfast. The cooks nearly fainted. "Your Highness." Ada blinked in confusion. "What? You cannot enter the kitchen alone." "Why not?" A terrified cook answered carefully. "Queens do not cook." Ada frowned immediately. "That sounds like a terrible rule." The cooks exchanged nervous glances. Before panic could spread further, Chima walked into the kitchen and burst into laughter. "There you are." Ada folded her arms. "Your palace is stressful." The prince kissed her forehead casually. "You disappeared from bed like a criminal." "I wanted yam." One elderly cook looked horrified. "We would have prepared anything your highness desired." Ada pointed at the steaming pot nearby. "You already prepared it." Shema laughed harder. Within weeks, the palace servants secretly adored her. Unlike previous royal women, Ada treated workers kindly. She learned their names, asked about their families, helped elderly servants carry things despite their protests. Sometimes she even joined cooks inside the kitchen, simply because she enjoyed conversation. At first, many palace elites found her behavior shocking. But slowly people began respecting her deeply, especially after they noticed something important. Ada never pretended to be somebody else. She remained herself, completely strong, honest, fearless. One afternoon, Queen Ifunanya found Ada outside the palace gardens helping a maid arrange flower pots. The queen smiled knowingly. "You realize servants become nervous when royalty helps them work." Ada sighed dramatically. "Everybody in this palace worries too much." The queen laughed softly. "That's because this palace spent many years built around fear and hierarchy." Ada carefully adjusted another flower pot. "Well, that sounds exhausting." Queen Ifunanya studied her fondly. "You're changing this place already." Ada looked surprised. "I am." "Yes." The queen's eyes softened thoughtfully. "People smile more now." Those words stayed with Ada long afterward, because deep inside she still struggled with feeling worthy of palace life. Sometimes she woke at night convinced everything was a dream. Sometimes she stared at the massive royal bedroom in disbelief, remembering the tiny house where she once lived alone. And sometimes fear still whispered inside her. What if one day people regretted accepting her? But Chima always noticed whenever doubt returned. One evening he found her, standing quietly on the palace balcony, overlooking the glowing city lights of Enugu. "You're thinking too loudly again," he teased softly. Ada rolled her eyes. "How do you always know? You disappear emotionally." He wrapped his arms gently around her waist from behind. For several moments they simply stood together peacefully beneath the evening breeze. Then Ada spoke quietly. "Do you ever regret it?" Chima frowned slightly. "Regret what? Choosing me over the throne?" The prince turned her gently toward him immediately. "I never chose you over the throne." Ada looked confused. You literally offered to give it up. Yes, Chima said softly, but I didn't lose anything by loving you. Emotion flickered across her face instantly. He touched her cheek carefully. You helped me become the kind of man worthy of leading people. Ada smiled faintly. You say dangerous things too beautifully. I learned from you. She laughed softly and leaned against him. Far below them the kingdom sparkled peacefully beneath the night sky. For the first time in years Chima truly felt at peace with his future. Meanwhile, King Obiara quietly observed all these changes with growing reflection. At first he expected palace chaos, after expected criticism, expected regret. Instead, something unexpected happened. The people loved Ada not because she became royal, but because she never forgot ordinary people after becoming royal. Every week, Ada visited villages personally instead of sending palace representatives. She created programs supporting widows, orphans, and struggling workers across the kingdom. She even established safer climbing equipment and financial support for local palm wine tappers after several workers suffered injuries. The villagers nearly worshipped her afterward. She remembers us. She understands suffering. She is one of us. Even the royal chiefs who once opposed her could no longer deny reality. The kingdom itself was changing positively. One afternoon, King Obiora sat with several chiefs discussing community matters when Man finally sighed heavily. I was wrong about her. Several others nodded quietly. The king looked thoughtful. Yes, he admitted softly, so was I. That evening, Queen Ifunanya found her husband standing alone inside the royal gardens watching Ada from a distance. Nearby, Ada laughed with several palace children while teaching them how to weave palm fronds together. Even dressed in royal fabrics, she still moved naturally, still carried village warmth inside her. The queen smiled knowingly. You finally see it now. King Obiora crossed his arms thoughtfully. She has strength and humility. The king nodded slowly. She reminds people that leadership is service. Queen Ifunanya looked at him carefully. You're proud of her. King Obiora remained silent briefly, then finally answered honestly. Yes. The queen smiled warmly. And Ikenna. The king's expression softened slightly. Our son became happier the moment he stopped living for everybody else. For a while neither spoke. Then the king sighed deeply. I nearly destroyed that happiness because of fear. Queen Ifunanya gently held his hand. But you changed. The king looked toward Ada and Ikenna standing together beneath the garden lights now. No, he corrected quietly. They changed me. Months passed peacefully. Chima gradually took on more royal responsibilities, while King Obiora slowly prepared him for future leadership. But, unlike before, Chima approached leadership differently now. He visited villages personally, held meetings with ordinary workers, listened more carefully to struggling communities, and everywhere he went Ada often accompanied him. Together they became deeply loved across Enugu. Not because they were perfect, but because they felt human real. One afternoon, Chima and Ada visited the exact village road where they first met. The palm trees still swayed gently beneath the hot afternoon sun while villagers greeted them excitedly. Several men laughed when they saw the future king approaching the climbing area again. Your Highness still wants to tap palm wine. Ada burst into laughter instantly. He nearly broke his neck last time. Chima looked offended. I improved. No, Ada corrected proudly. You survived. The villagers laughed loudly. Even now, despite becoming royalty, Ada still teased him exactly the same way. And honestly, Chima loved that most. As they walked together beneath the trees later, the prince suddenly stopped beside the exact spot where he first saw her climbing. You know, he said softly, my life changed right here. Ada smiled faintly. You mean when you realized rich people cannot climb trees? I mean when I met the most stubborn woman alive. She grinned. True. Chima gently pulled her closer. I almost married Princess Amara. Ada laughed dramatically. A tragedy. The ancestors protected me. She shook her head smiling. You're terrible. The prince kissed her forehead softly. No, I'm lucky. For a moment silence settled peacefully between them while warm sunlight filtered through the palm trees above. Then Ada looked at him quietly. You know what's strange? What? For years, I thought survival was enough. Chima listened carefully. But loving you taught me something bigger. She smiled softly. People deserve happiness too. Emotion tightened inside his chest immediately, because that truth applied to both of them. All their lives' duty and survival shaped them differently. Chima survived expectations. Ada survived hardship. But somehow they found freedom inside each other. That night the royal family gathered together peacefully for dinner inside the palace. Laughter filled the hall naturally now. No tension, no arguments, no fear. At one point King Obiora looked toward Ada thoughtfully. You know, he said calmly, there are still chiefs shocked a palm wine tapper became future queen. Ada nearly choked laughing. Honestly, sometimes I'm shocked too. The entire table burst into laughter. Even the king smiled fully. Then King Obiora raised his glass slowly. To unexpected blessings. Everyone lifted their glasses. Queenie Fanania smiled warmly. And to love strong enough to change traditions. Chima looked toward Ada beside him. She caught his gaze instantly. And in that quiet moment between them both remembered everything. The arguments, the fear, the impossible odds, the battles they fought, simply to stay together, yet somehow love won anyway. Later that evening after dinner ended, Chima and Ada stood once more on the palace balcony, overlooking the glowing kingdom below. The same kingdom that once threatened to separate them forever. Now it celebrated them instead. Ada rested against his chest quietly. Do you think we'll be good rulers one day? She asked softly. Chima smiled gently. With you beside me. He kissed her hair. Carefully. Absolutely. Below them, music drifted softly through the warm night air of Enugu. And high above the kingdom they fought so hard to protect the billionaire prince and the palm wine tapper held each other beneath the stars. No longer separated by wealth or status or fear. Just two people who found love when the world least expected it. And together they lived happily ever after. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel.